A Scoundrel's Courage. Written by Timothy J. R. Raines. Narrated by Sarah Palmero.
Chapter 1. Uppsala, Sweden. Sigurd gallops his fingers on the gunwale as the city drifts into view around the river bend. It's a clean city, built on a wide green plain, surrounded by farms and clusters of trees ablaze with the colors of fall. Ships are moored all along the east bank of the river, fishing boats full of nets and line, merchant vessels, and sleek Swedish warships. There are many idols along the quay, enormous blood-stained gods carved of wood, standing guard over the river. As they prepare to dock, a man shouts to them and directs the skipper to an empty mooring in the shadow of Tyr's likeness. It's been nearly 3 days since they were attacked by the Halagolanders in the night. In that time, they've sailed around the southern coast of Sweden, stopping briefly in the major port city of Agnefit to hire a Swedish pilot who could guide them through the complex fjords of Lake Mälaren, and rode north up the Fyris River to the place of the King of Sweden's hall, the city of Uppsala. Sigurd takes a deep breath, going over what he's going to say when he goes before the king's high table. The relationship between Sweden and Burgundy is one of friction, with Gunther sending too many pushy envoys to recruit Sweden to help them against the Romans. The last envoy had returned to Worms with his head in a basket. The Swedes like the Franks a little better than their Burgundian allies, or at least they like to trade with them. Frankish steel is considered to be among the highest quality on earth, eagerly sought after by any warlike kingdom. Sigurd, however, is widely known for his friendship with Gunther, and is somewhat concerned with the message his arrival will send. He does not expect a warm welcome. As the crew moor the ship and the pilot introduces them to the Swedes on the quay, Sigurd glances afterward at the new slave girl lashed to the stringer. She glares back at him with her fierce blue eyes. That hateful gaze has been burning a hole in the back of his head since the moment he took her into captivity. She's hardly spoken a word aside from, "I need to piss," or "I need to shit." She's refused to eat or even drink until the morning of the second day, when at last she accepted a piece of bread from one of the men and hungrily tore into it and demanded a drink of water from his skin. She might have chosen slavery over death, but he can see this Hervor woman is far too proud and stubborn to ever make a good thrall. He'll never live in peace again if he takes her back to his castle to be his serving girl. She would be more valuable as a bed slave. Even after cutting off her braid and putting an iron cuff around her neck, her beauty outshines that of the late Queen Rowena, and even rivals that of Brunhilde, who is generally considered by everyone to be the most gorgeous woman in Europe. The girl must be from a noble, if not royal, lineage. Not that it matters now. She'll spend the rest of her life between some lucky fellow's bedsheets. He's thought about giving her to Gunther, but with the way she's glaring at him now, perhaps that isn't such a good idea. He doesn't need another woman trying to murder his friend the second he turns his back. It seems like a tremendous waste, but the smartest thing is to give her to King Gizur, though he wonders if it wouldn't be more merciful to snap her neck. Sigurd steps out of the longship. He clasps hands with the Swedes on the quay, then orders that Hervor be cut loose and brought up from the ship.
"This is Uppsala,"
he says, as his men shove her up onto the deck beside him.
"the capital of Sweden."
"I know it is," she snarls. It's the first response he's gotten from her yet.
"I'm giving you to King Gizur after all. You'll be his bed slave, or whatever pleases him."
She glares up at him, but behind the smoldering defiance, her blue eyes are full of fear. "You said you're not too fond of cruelty."
"Prince Sigurd,"
says the Swedish pilot.
"Here comes the king."
Word of their arrival has reached the hall, and King Gizur is making his way down toward the dock with an entourage of blonde-bearded huskarls. He cocks his head as he peers curiously at Sigurd and the Frankish crew. He is a clean, slender man of particular hygiene. His blonde hair and beard are neatly trimmed, his fine garb newly washed and without even the smallest rip or stain. There is a refreshing scent about him, perhaps mint or pine. Next to Sigurd, Hervor breathes an oath as he comes nearer, and hangs her head. suddenly casting off her stubborn arrogance and assuming the timid compliance of a humble thrall maiden, evidently not wishing to draw the attention of the Swedish king. Gizur smiles and reaches for Sigurd's hands.
"Welcome to Uppsala,"
he says with his musical Nordic accent.
"You must be Prince Sigurd. When I heard... Gods, you're big. Isn't he big? He's enormous."
"He is
very large indeed,"
answers one of the huskarls.
"Those poor Roman legionnaires,"
says Gizur.
"You Germans must be pulverizing them."
Sigurd is about to explain that the only pulverizing that's taken place recently has been in the form of intense negotiations following the sudden surge of pro-Germanic military forces due to the marriage of Gunther and Brunhilde and the subsequent alliance of their kingdoms, but he decides not to get into it.
"We do all right,"
he says with a shrug.
"Well, you must be hungry,"
says the king.
"And I know you've traveled far. Come. The least I can do is offer you food and drink before I send you back to Gunther."
He turns back toward the hall, then pauses, peering inquisitively at Sigurd over his shoulder.
"I am correct in assuming that Gunther sent you?" "Yes. I mean, no. Well, sort of."
Sigurd clears his throat as he and the crew follow the king and his huskarls toward the hall.
"What I mean to say is, I am here because of Gunther, but I can assure you it's got nothing to do with helping us against Stilicho and the Romans. I'm actually just—"
"Oh, that is a relief," says Gizur, his face brightening.
"I'm afraid I was quite annoyed when I heard you'd come to Uppsala. I thought to myself, Loki's children. How many heads do I have to chop off before these idiots realize we're not interested? Gods, we'll be running out of baskets pretty soon here in Uppsala."
He laughs, patting Sigurd on the chest.
"I'm just joking, Sigurd. Just joking. You know I can't wait to find out what you're really doing here. Tell me, did Gunther like my wedding gift?" "Wedding gift? Remind me what it was again."
"Perfume from the Far East, made from the yellow flower of the cananga tree. A sensual fragrance which incites the body to eroticism." To his shame, Sigurd thinks of the sweet scent of Brunhilde's hair and body that had so intoxicated him, exciting him to deeper passions as he plunged into the throes of adultery. He quickly shoos the thought out of his mind.
"I didn't watch him open the presents,"
he says.
"Well, there was a man who dwelt in Sweden for a time,"
says Gizur.
"A friend of my father's, and a great champion. He had giant's blood like you. Arrow-Odd the Wide-Wandered, we called him. Perhaps you've heard of him." "I have, yes." "There is no place on earth he hasn't walked or sailed. He was the most interesting person to ever come to Uppsala. He brought that perfume from a perilous land of volcanoes and poisonous snakes, where the brown-skinned men who live there consider the choicest meat to be human flesh. The princess of the village where he and his crew were staying was captured by a rival tribe and carried off into the mountains. Her people believed she had been taken to her doom and had already begun to mourn her loss. But Arrow-Odd, compassionate hero that he was, snatched up his club and bow and dashed after her into the jungle. At dawn the next morning, he brought the girl back. The chieftain offered him the girl's hand in marriage, but not wanting to take her so far from her family and native land, he declined, even though she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Instead, he accepted the girl's dowry, 12 jars of sacred perfume, a gift he could not refuse for risk of severely offending the girl's people. Barely listening, Sigurd is busy taking note of the frequent temples and the wooden idols lining every street and perched by every doorstep. He'd heard they were serious about the gods in Uppsala, but— I'll have to tell Gunther that story when I see him next," he says quickly. "I'm sure he'll be very flattered." "I tell you, Sigurd," says Gizur as they near the hall, "I do not care much for its smell. When our champion, Hjalmar the Great-Hearted, fell on Samsa Island, Arrow-Odd, who loved Hjalmar more than his own son, used a jar of that perfume to prepare his body for the grave. And when my sister could not bear her grief and chose to die with Hjalmar, Arrow-Odd gave my father and I another jar for her. And again, a few years later, when my father was killed over a woman's stupidity, I smelt the yellow flower of the cananga tree, Its scent, to me, is the scent of death. At the hall, a 12-foot Thor and Balder guard either side of the way in. There's a bowl of blood on a stand between them, and Gizur flicks a little blood onto the beards of the idols as he leads them inside. Sigurd reluctantly imitates this action and nods for the others to do the same. There is a roaring fire in the hall, and a row of tables in front of it. Gizur gestures for them to sit and stands by the hearth as male servants bring out a meal for Sigurd and his crew. He shivers in the crisp fall air and holds his hands over the glowing heat. "It's starting to get colder," he says. "It won't be long until it's snowing." Sigurd tears the flesh off a turkey leg with his teeth and washes it down with a horn full of mead, then holds out the horn for Hervor to fill again. She glares at him, but reaches for the flagon in the middle of the table. She pours too much, and Sigurd swears as mead spills over the rim. "Sorry, Lord," she whispers. Gizur shakes his head. "New thrall?" "Very new. She's quite beautiful. I'm surprised you haven't made her a bed slave." "It's been tempting, but I was thinking of giving her to you. What do you think? Do you like her?" Gizur watches her without interest as she fills another man's horn, hissing an apology as she splashes mead all over his hand, causing him to shout. He stares back into the crackling fireplace. "Ultimately, Sigurd, that depends on why you're here." Sigurd's heart jumps into his throat. His mind scrambles for the words he's been rehearsing over and over. He puts down the turkey leg and wipes his face on his sleeve. "There is, a very delicate matter that involves—" He clears his throat. "As the King of Sweden—" He pauses, pressing his fingertips together. "You see, Gunther has come up with a plan that will win us much fame and potentially bring many new allies to our cause." Gizur rolls his eyes. "I'll be needing your permission to travel through Sweden." "You don't need my permission for that. But if I find out you've been bothering my jarls with talk about the Romans, I'm afraid I'll have to ship you back to Xanten with your head in a basket," he says pleasantly. No, I assure you, I'm not here to do that." Gizur whirls around. "So why are you here, Sigurd?" He comes toward him, the silver rings on his fingers grinding against the wood as he leans in over the table with his fist. "What are you going to do in my lands? What is so important that you need to come ask my permission first, Sigurd leans away, startled by this sudden aggression. "I need to go to Lake Storsen." Gizur's face darkens. "Lake Storsen? Gunther is sending you to Lake Storsen? He's out of his mind. You are out of your mind. This friend of yours is going to get you killed. So I have your permission, then?" "Absolutely not. It is out of the question. That creature, you have no idea the kind of trouble you would cause for the people of the lake. You cannot even imagine the terror in which they live. Then let me free them from their oppression." "Oh, it is impossible. The creature cannot be killed." "It can be killed. With Balmung." Gizur's face contorts with anger as he looks to the immense weapon leaned against the table. "Sigurd, you've asked for my permission. I've given you my answer. I forbid you to go to Lake Storsen. You and your crew will spend the night in my hall, and in the morning you will return to Xanten." Sigurd's heart thumps. It's the moment he's been anticipating. He rises suddenly from the table, causing Gizur to step back, and his huskarls to reach for their blades. "You should be ashamed of yourself. What sort of weakling king are you that you can sit here in your nice warm hall, doing nothing, while your people have lived in fear for generation upon generation? Gunther and I have fought our entire lives to throw off the tyranny of the Roman Empire. Together, we've waded through the tide of countless battles. We've faced death in every form. Our lives have been an endless struggle of treachery and war. What have you done, Gizur? Where are your brave deeds? I say you're not a man." Gizur's eyes flash with anger, but he draws in his breath and grins deviously. "Did you write that little speech on the way here?" Heat rises in Sigurd's cheeks. No. He lies. "That was all, off the cuff." Gizur chuckles. "Is that so?" And what? You think you can force me into a duel by offending my honor? My family was destroyed by that kind of stupidity. Berserkers coming into this hall, demanding whatever they wanted from my father, using all kinds of foul language and insults while addressing the king, going so far as to ask for my sister, Ingeborg. Gods. Sigurd, can you actually imagine handing your 17-year-old daughter over to 12 mindless criminals just because one of them used the A word? Not really. I tell you what, I thought I was angry. I thought I had courage in my heart. Then I saw Hjalmar get up and walk right up to Angantyr Angrensen, the filthiest, most bloodthirsty savage ever to drool on the floor of my father's hall. I mean, he got right in his face. I tell you, any other man would have shuddered and shrunk away from the heavy aura of that man's presence. But Hjalmar the Great-Hearted dared to look that beast in the eye, and called him and all his brothers to the Hjolm. We had a champion then, who would have answered your insult with steel, and I do not doubt he would have killed you, even with Bolmung and your giant strength. Gizur holds his hands out helplessly. But we have no heroes left like that. Sigurd, there is no man in Sweden who can withstand you. Of course, I cannot allow this stain upon my honor, so unless you take back what you said, I will take you to the Hjolm. You'll chop me in half, I'm certain, and you'll continue on to Lake Storsen. You'll die horrifically trying to carry out Gunther's foolish errand, either in the serpent's acid breath, or at the hands of the people of Frey's Island, who, when they discover that a foreign prince has come to incite the wrath of their god, for in their terror they worship the creature as a deity who to them is far more imminent and powerful than Freyr or Balder, will descend upon you in a zealous mob and skin you alive out in the wild. In the meantime, a new king will be chosen in my place from among my jarls. By then, word will have spread that you murdered me by forcing me into a duel no man could win. There are some who will rejoice, but many, I'm thinking particularly of King Roar of the Danes and Queen Sifka of the Russ, who I am to understand just lost 2 of her sons to a violent altercation with a foreigner, will see the truth of the affair. That Gunther was so eager to recruit more allies to his cause that he sent you, his bulldog, to try and strong-arm me into joining you, and when I refused, you killed me in a Hjolmgang. I don't think I need to tell you that the consequences of this would be disastrous. On the one hand, it would make you look desperate, like your campaign isn't going well. On the other, it would offend the other northern rulers who aren't interested in being pushed around by you and Gunther. Your economy would suffer. Allies would be less likely to join you, or worse, would be more likely to betray you when you're counting on them most. You'd be lucky if you didn't have another war on your hands. But, says Gizur, I know you're not some dumb brute like Angantyr and his brothers who used to go around extorting kings. You're just very passionate about your cause and got carried away. I know you didn't really mean what you said. Sigurd looks glumly down at his plate. You're right, he says. I take it back. Gizur yawns and stretches his arms over his head. Well, if that's settled, I think it's time for an afternoon nap. Sigurd clenches his fist, wondering if he shouldn't just set a course for Lake Storsen without Gizur's permission, but he's sure he'd find out, and there'd be more trouble with the Swedes. Besides, he needs the king's blessing to sway the lake folk to his cause. It'd be better if he came along. Gah! If only Gunther were here. If there was one man who could talk anybody into doing the last thing they wanted, it was Gunther. But how would he do it? What words would he say? But, as he strains to set the wheels of his mind in motion, Sigurd looks up at the wooden likeness of Odin, looming grimly over the hall from behind the high table. An image flashes suddenly before his eyes. Gunther, instead of him, standing at the prow as the Valkyrie drifts into the Uppsala harbor, arching his brow at the sight of the enormous gods along the quay. Gunther following Gizur to his hall,
twisting his mustache as he observes the many idols perched along every street and outside every doorstep. Gunther grinning deviously as Gizur flicks the wand of blood into the beards of Thor and Balder. There's still a card he hasn't played.
"What if I told you,"
he says as Gizur turns to leave,
"that Princess Gertrud witnessed my triumph in a dream?"
"Oh, now what are you talking about?"
"I'm talking about a vision from the gods."
Something, perhaps fear, flashes in Gizur's eyes, and the huskarls standing along the wall whisper to each other in superstitious reverence.
"I'll have you know,"
Gizur says darkly,
"that we take that kind of proclamation very seriously in Uppsala. It's one thing to recant an insult that was spoken too hastily, but to speak presumptuously about a vision from the gods,
that's another matter entirely."
"I'm sure you've heard of Gertrud's reputation for seeing the future."
"Yes, and I've also heard that she worships her mother's strange gods."
"Well, I've heard that this Aroad you speak of prays to Jesus Christ, and yet you praise him as one of the greatest heroes to ever grace your hall."
Gizur pauses, his eyes shifting over the flames. "Fair enough," he says.
"What did Gertrud see?" "Me, crouching in a trench, thrusting Balmung through the creature's heart as it slithered overhead. She said she saw me drenched in the serpent's blood. She also said I dare not attempt the feat alone. There will be another with me who will lure Fafnir into the trap."
Gizur laughs.
"Lure Fafnir? And which one of these unlucky fools will have that job?" "Actually,"
says Sigurd,
"such a task is best left to the bravery of kings."
At this, Gizur turns pale and taps his fingers against his thigh.
"Why should it be me who helps you? Why would you trust the deed to another when our victory has been ordained? Gizur, when we strike the creature to its doom, they will sing of our triumph for 1,000 years. 1,000 years! We would be the most famous men on earth."
Gizur swallows, glancing at his huskarls, all of whom are staring at him with grim pride.
"And what of the serpent's treasure?"
And there it is. He has him now.
"It is Swedish gold,"
he says.
"You can have it all. Gunther asked only that I return with Fafnir's head and his magic ring. Although, I'd like to take one shipful of treasure for myself."
"One shipful of treasure won't be missed."
"But Fafnir's ring is worth more than all the treasure combined. It should be an heirloom passed from one Swedish king to the next. If it's worth so much, then why have you left it sitting in Fafnir's lair for the last 1,000 years?
Gizur grinds his teeth.
"You're being greedy,"
says Sigurd.
"You wouldn't care about it at all if I wasn't proposing we go and get it. You'll still be wealthier than the Roman emperor."
Gizur looks back into the fire with a hiss.
Fine. You'll do it? Really?" "Yes. I'll take you to Lake Storsen and help you kill the serpent."
Sigurd's men cry out in joy as they raise their horns, and the Swedish huskarls nod proudly in approval of their king. Smiling, Sigurd pours a horn of mead for Gizur and puts it in his hand.
"Then let us drink. Let us drink to our triumph and to the friendship that our quest will inevitably forge."
"Skål," says Gizur, clinking his horn against Sigurd's. The two men drink, and Gizur looks to where Hervor the thrall maiden is filling up men's horns again.
"You know," he says, "I think I would like to take the girl. I'll bring her along to Frey's Island and bless our mission with a sacrifice to the gods."
Chapter 2. Indalsölven, Sweden. Hervor. If I knew this Sigurd fellow was going to hand me over to King Gizur, I would have chosen to die back on the beach. And yet, here I am, Gizur's slave girl to do with as he pleases. Fortunately, he won't let anyone touch me. But that's all going to change when we reach Lake Storsen. I know what happens to a thrall woman before she's sacrificed. My every thought is of escape. Each time we stop for the night, each time the Swedes unchain me from the stringer, I'm waiting for an opportunity. So far, My best chance is when they're making camp. At dusk, Gizur's ships will moor along the riverbank, and one of his huscarls will bring me ashore and chain me to a tree until morning. This happens consistently, in the same way, every night, and I've been waiting for the perfect chance. There are only a few seconds when the man is vulnerable, when he's holding my wrist in one hand and reaching for the chain around the tree. The light is dim, and with any luck, he'll have had some mead. That's when I'll strike. I'll tear suddenly from his grasp, twirl around the tree trunk, and smash his head in with my shackles. Then I'll get his sword, dart off into the woods, and make my way to Samsa Island. Or, if they cut off my escape and surround me, I'll meet my death on a heap of Swedish corpses. Tonight I'm going to do it. Escape or die. The river is becoming a golden serpent, and as the men dip their oars into the blazing waters, my heart is pounding. Any moment now, Gizur will have his skipper take us ashore for the night. Very soon, my chance will come. I shut my eyes as I prepare. Golveg, mother, accept the blood I am about to spill as an oblation. At the prow of the ship, someone blows a horn, the signal for the other ships to pull ashore. I open my eyes, my heart throbbing the way it did as we'd row into battle with the Finns. I gaze coolly at my Swedish captors. Which one of them will it be? I fill my lungs with a deep breath and slowly sigh it out again. I'm ready. But the skipper doesn't take us in. The men are still rowing strong. Then the man at the prow sounds his horn a second time. I've waited too long. I thought we'd have another day at least. But as we round a bend in the river, the Indalsolvin widens, opening up like a serpent's jaws to engulf a prey much larger than itself. The gold streak-watered course branches off, diverting around a black shore. Frey's Island, I hear one of the Swedes say, and my heart sinks into my stomach as I see the vast lake spreading out behind it. We've arrived at Lake Storsen. There'll be no escaping for me now. Squinting in the twilight, I can see docks along the shore of the island, and along the mainland where ships and boats are berthed. And upon the island through the trees, I can see high-peaked rooftops and tendrils of smoke rising from chimneys. There's a strong ring fort built on the high ground above the village. There are guard towers, too, overlooking the lake, watching over the skiffs and fishing boats out on the pink water. The surface is still and tranquil, and I can see the ripples where fish are snapping at the flies. There's a glint of silver as a line is cast in the setting sun. The man at the prow sounds his horn again. This time, he's answered by a horn blast from the shore. Gizur stands up from where he's been sitting, wrapped in a blanket, and joins him at the prow. People are coming out of the hull and frozen houses, smiths and barns, gathering on the dock to see who's come. They part to let their chieftain through, a gray-bearded man, richly clad in dyed wool cloth and a cloak of fur. With him comes a woman, and the sight of her causes me to shudder. Her cloak is the bluish-black of a raven's wings, set with glass beads and many stones. She has a lambskin shawl around her shoulders, from which 9 cattails dangle. In her hand she holds a staff which, like her cloak, is set with stones. Her blonde hair is streaked with silver. Her cold eyes are glossy and far-gazing. She is a vulva witch, a seeress. It is she who performs the village sacrifices, and in the morning it will be she who reddens the altar with my blood. With a smile, Gizur raises his hand in greeting as we pull up along the quay.
People of Frey's Island, I am Gizur Ingvarsson, your king. What say the gods? Gods are wondering what brings the king of Sweden out to the forsaken wilderness of Lake Storsen,
says the chieftain. He grins as Gizur steps up onto the dock, and the two men clasp hands.
Welcome, king.
The chieftain shouts over his shoulder for a meal to be prepared for Gizur and his men, but as the other ships find moorings, the seeress hisses like an angry cat, her eyes flaring wide as she points with her long-nailed finger at the Frankish longship drifting into an empty berth.
What is this? Gizur? No, my king.
Sigurd halts in mid-movement with one foot on the quay, glancing awkwardly between Gizur and the chieftain. The seeress advances toward him, hissing and waving him back with broad strokes of her arm.
"You!"
She cries.
"I know why you have come, Sigurd Sigmundsson."
You do?
Says Sigurd.
"I can see into your heart. You mean to slay the serpent."
There are some groans from the gathered crowd. Men shake their head in objection. Women cover their mouths and pull their children close. The chieftain looks at Gizur, aghast.
Is this true?
Gizur hangs his head and fidgets nervously with the laces of his tunic.
It is true, yes.
He says quietly.
We have come to liberate you from the evil which oppresses you. Oh, is that right? And just how do you intend to accomplish this? It is impossible. Thor himself could not strike the creature down. You blaspheme the gods,
Gizur says faintly, still not looking up.
You have not seen what I have seen.
Sigurd steps onto the dock with his big sword, and I have to crane my neck to look at him as he addresses the chieftain and the people. He looks like he's about to vomit. His knees are wobbling like a newborn foal.
I can see that all of you are afraid,
he says.
You have lived too long under Fafnir's shadow, but your king and I do not come bringing terror, but hope.
I've heard him rehearsing it over and over again at the prow of the ship and in the camp. Frankly, it was more convincing hearing him whisper it anxiously to himself. Then he does something I haven't seen him practice before. Flips his giant sword from his sheepskin sheath. Black hate coils in my guts as I look on the blade which cut down my crewmates. He holds it up in the setting sun. He's mustered a bit more confidence now, but his voice is still shaking.
Behold, Balmung, the sword of the gods. It is so sharp it can cut through anything on earth. Steel, stone, even Fafnir's impenetrable scales. I tell you, with this sword, I will unseam the serpent's belly and gut him like a fish.
"You see,"
cries the seeress, turning to the crowd.
"People of Frey, how many of your sons and daughters have died screaming under my knife to stay the font of wrath this foreign prince means to set upon you? Will you allow these men to incite the anger of your god? Will you pay with your children for their ignorance? Rise up and seize these—"
Astrid,
says the chieftain, silencing her with an outstretched hand.
There's no need for that.
Gizur scowls at the seeress in disgust. Sigurd looks like he's going to snap her neck. I hope he does. I don't like this Astrid woman, and I'm sick to my stomach at the thought of dying at her hands. The chieftain turns to Gizur.
I know you to be a reasonable man, my king. You know that Fafnir dwells in a poisoned valley, filled with a noxious vapor. What use is a sword, even a giant sword that might cut at the serpent's flesh, if your lungs will bubble up and burst before you get within 2 miles of his lair? And if, somehow, you did manage to confront the creature, if he breathes on you directly, your flesh will be fizzled from your bones. So tell me, Gizur, what has this fellow said that could possibly lead you to have faith in his triumph? The princess he's betrothed to, she's a sort of mystic, and has dreamed of our victory in a vision from the gods.
It's pretty clear it sounds as ridiculous to Gizur as it does to everyone else. The chieftain chuckles and pats Gizur on the back, nodding at the seeress.
"I do not know what gods your princess prays to,"
Astrid says, reaching into her cloak and loosening the pouch from her belt.
"but I will show you what fate the Norns have written."
She scatters her talismans on the dock, mumbling to herself as she looks over the rune-burned wood chips, flipping over the odd piece that's fallen on its side.
"Death?"
she cries, startling us all.
"Do you see, my king? Do you see what the runes say? Your quest will end in death."
I have a little snicker to myself, because I've seen this sort of trick before. A traveling Volva witch came to Ofotfjord and did a reading for my grandfather. She told him he would fall upon hard times and that within the next year his treasury would be empty. When he asked her what he must do to prevent this fate, the woman showed him a wooden idol she'd whittled. She said she'd imbued it with Seder magic, that it would bring him luck, and if he hid it in his treasury, it would never be empty. In return, she asked for a bride's price in silver. My grandfather agreed, for the witch had fooled him. However, when my mother heard, she was furious and stormed up to my grandfather's hall. She explained that if he hid the idol in his treasury, of course it would never be empty. The idol would be in it. She had tricked him into giving her 3 months' wages for a worthless stick carving. The woman had already left, but Asger went out with the Huskarls to track her down. By sunset, he dragged her back before my grandfather, who tore out her tongue and had her hanged as a liar and thief. He told me to always be wary of Volva women who are eager to read runes and speak in prophecies. This Astrid woman's playing the same kind of game. Of course Sigurd's quest will end in death. Any idiot could speak that kind of prophecy. But whether it will be Sigurd and Gizur who meet their deaths, or the serpent Fafnir, only the Norns can tell. However, she has everyone deceived. Even the Frankish crew looks unsettled by what's written in the runes. Gizur gnaws on his finger, staring at the seeress and her talismans. Then he looks at Sigurd and shakes his head. Sigurd is crestfallen. I, however, am deeply relieved they'll no longer be making a sacrifice to bless their mission. With any luck, they'll take me back to Uppsala, and I'll have more opportunities to escape.
Come,
Says the chieftain.
we are preparing a feast for you and your men. Let us eat and drink and think about other things.
Not so fast,
Says Astrid, holding up a crooked finger.
You've come in force, far out into the wild with these foreign men. That shows me that you truly were intending to face the creature. King Gizur, your heart is too easily swayed by brave and foolish talk. One of your number must die, that you might know the cost of your ignorance.
Gizur nods, and Sigurd turns away, swearing and throwing up his hands in disbelief.
I come bringing a sacrifice.
Gizur says. He and all of Frey's island look in my direction.
She'll do,
Says Astrid. Hell and Loki! Rough hands seize me and lift me from the ship, and as Sigurd and Gizur go up to the hall with the chieftain, a pair of Swedes drag me along behind them. They chain me up to a wooden post outside the hall, but on the way we pass a great stone overlooking the lake. It's round and smooth, and there's a wide space around it for many people to gather. It's covered in rune carvings, and it's blotched with dark stains the rain couldn't wash. It's the altar to the god Frey. Chapter 3. Frey's Island, Sweden.
I thought we had an agreement.
Sigurd whispers as he sits down next to Gizur at the high table. Gizur clenches his fist next to his plate.
Sigurd, I just don't see what's changed.
A seeress just read my fate in the runes. That's what.
Oh, come on. That Volva woman? How do you know what she sees in the runes? She can say whatever she wants, and everyone will believe her.
You blaspheme the gods.
Am I? I'm just saying we don't really know. It's obvious she's prospering here. She has the whole village in her clutches of terror. If we kill Fafnir, she'll lose all her influence. How can anyone trust her if her own interests are hanging on what she prophesies? Sigurd, that is a monstrous accusation.
On the other side of Gizur, the chieftain leans out over his plate.
Astrid plays a vital role in the protection of Frey's Island,
He says.
If it were not for her prophecies and the sacrifices she offers, we would not be able to fish or take our boats out on the lake. Without her, we would live in constant fear of the serpent. It sounds to me like you do live in constant fear, considering you sacrifice your children to the creature. Nothing in life is free, Prince Sigurd.
Sigurd nods at the man's daughters sitting further down the table.
What about them? What happens when Astrid chooses one of them to be the serpent's meal?
The chieftain's face darkens.
I'll have you know,
He says.
that my girls once had a sister and a mother.
Sigurd's heart sinks.
I Sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I think you did. Enough of this, says Gizur. We are leaving in the morning, Sigurd. I don't want to hear another word about Fafnir, the lake serpent. The matter is settled. It's not going to happen.
Sigurd glares at where Astrid is sitting at one of the low tables among the Swedish crewmen, eating a plate of roasted goat hearts. She meets his gaze with a smug look, making a show of sucking the grease from her long-nailed finger. The iron band tightens around his skull. He'd like to flatten her head into a pancake. Because of her, his quest is ruined, as are his chances of repairing his friendship with Gunther and his engagement to Gertrud. He gets up from the table.
I'm going out for some air, he says. I have a headache.
As Sigurd leaves, the chieftain leans in toward Gizur.
Should we have someone keep an eye on him?
I don't think that will be necessary. He told me how he planned to kill the serpent. His scheme requires 2 men.
After your Volva's rune casting,
who would be stupid enough to help him with such a foolish errand? Sigurd steps out into the dark. Behind him, orange light spills from the hall with the warmth of fires and the cacophony of voices. It's a cold night. He shudders in the freezing air, rubbing his hands together and folding his big arms across his chest. His breath shimmers in the moonlight, and he looks out at the reflection of the moon and stars glimmering in the still waters of the lake. There's the quiet rattling of chains as that Hervor woman straightens herself up against the post. She stares at him, shivering, her blue eyes as sharp as the cold night air. Sigurd. He ignores her and looks back to the lake. Prince Sigurd. He rolls his eyes.
I'll have someone bring you a blanket when I go back inside.
I don't want a blanket.
Suit yourself.
He turns to go back into the hall.
Sigurd, wait! Wait! I want to talk to you.
I think it's King Gizur you want,
says Sigurd.
And if you ask me, there isn't much you can do that will get you out of tomorrow morning.
It's Gizur I want to talk to you about, she says. He promised to help you slay the lake serpent, but now that he's here, and that Seerest cast her runes against it, he's backing out, isn't he?
And just what has that to do with you?
I'll help you slay the serpent in his place.
Everyone here is too afraid to help me now that that woman cast her runes, even my own men. Why don't you fear her prophecy of death?
Hervor smirks. I've seen that sort of woman swinging from a tree for telling crooked fortunes. I don't have much faith in what some witch tells me. What I do know is if I stay chained up to this post, I'm dead for sure. If I help you, at least there's a chance I won't be killed. And if we are successful, my brave deeds would wash off the stain that thraldom has left on my honor.
You willingly chose to become my thrall when you could have died in honor with your friends. What makes you think you can redeem yourself?
Many people already know my name, but not very many people will know I was your thrall. They'll hear about how you and I slew the creature, and our fame will spread. No one will know I was your slave girl for a couple days. If they do hear of it, they'll attribute it to rumor.
And just who are you that people know your name?
Her blue eyes glow fiercely from the dark. The Princess of Lofoten, Hervor Angantir's daughter.
Are you serious? Gizur will have you up by the ankles. You'll wish he sacrificed you.
She scowls.
Then you better not tell him if you want my help.
He looks around uneasily. There must be someone else he can find. If he sets her free, and Gizur learns her identity, it could very well start a war. But then, he might be starting one anyway. He blows into his cold hands and rubs them together.
Well,
she says impatiently,
what'll it be?
He draws in a deep breath and glances around again to be sure no one's watching.
All right,
he whispers.
Help me, and you'll have your freedom.
She chuckles. I want more than just my freedom, Sigurd.
What else do you want?
Passage to Denmark, to Samsa Island. He cringes, pulling his hand over his head.
I suppose we could make a quick detour.
And I want you to mention my name whenever you boast about how you killed the serpent.
Easy enough.
And I want a ship full of Fafnir's treasure.
You can't have a ship full of treasure.
Then a wagon full.
How about as much loot as you can carry in a bucket?
My own weight in gold. Sigurd grits his teeth.
Fine. Fine.
Swear to me in Odin's name. Sigurd sighs and covers one eye with his hand.
I swear before the one-eyed god that if you help me kill Fafnir the lake serpent, I'll do everything you just said.
Hervor grins. Then I'm your woman. Leave me for now, and come back when everyone's asleep. Make sure you have the key for these chains, and by the jaws of Fenrir, you better have a way to get this slave collar off my neck.
Trust me,
he says, cracking his knuckles as he heads back into the glowing hall.
I don't need a key.
Chapter 4. Lake Storsen, Sweden. Hervor. By midnight, we're halfway across the lake. The wind has picked up, and it's freezing out here on the water. Rowing keeps me warm, but my hands are red and raw from the cold. And the water's pretty choppy. The lake is fighting against me, making our little skiff pitch and roll all over the place. And my hair keeps flapping around, whipping me in the face and mouth. I wish Sigurd hadn't cut my braid off. He's sitting in the stern across from me, glancing over his shoulder at the tiny fires flickering on the island far behind us. He's all worried because I crept up into the watchtowers and made sure no one would see us sneaking off across the lake.
I really wish you hadn't killed those men,
he says. There's too much moonlight. They would have spotted us.
I know, but you didn't need to kill them. You could have knocked them out and tied them up.
Listen to this idiot, thinking I'm going to sneak up behind a man who's twice my size and try to bash him over the head just hard enough to knock him out for several hours, but just lightly enough it doesn't scramble his brains. More likely I'd crack his skull or not hit him hard enough and have him whip around and thrust his knife into my guts. I'm not likely to get that right the first time, let alone 4 times in a row. It would have been too risky, I tell him, and besides, we would have been stealing. He gives me a confused look. This skiff, if I hadn't killed those men, we'd be stealing it instead of taking it as our rightful booty. That would be need.
What if the skiff doesn't belong to one of those watchmen?
I shrug. Then the man who owns it will wake up, see his boat's gone, and thank the gods it wasn't his turn to keep watch. Loki, how much further? Sigurd points past me to an arm branching off from the main body of the lake.
Up there.
I shake my head. I'm exhausted. I've been killing myself trying to get us across the windy lake. My back's on fire, my arms are about to fall off, and I'm so hungry I could eat a whale. That arm could go on for miles. I pull 3 deep strokes with the left oar to change our course and take us in. He nods. Well, how much farther until Fafnir's lair?
I'd say we're about halfway to the mouth of the Dammon River.
Halfway? That's it? And how much farther after that?
20 miles, roughly.
He keeps his face straight as he says it, too. It's no trouble for him, I guess. Rowing a skiff upstream for 20 miles? It might as well be 40 miles, or 60 if the current's strong. It would be less work to swim. We should have got something with a sail. You planning to take a turn? I ask. I'm wearing myself ragged.
Quiet,
he says.
Stop. Look there.
He points to a pair of boulders poking up from the water. I think nothing of it at first and wonder why he's pointing them out. Then I realize they're out in the middle of the lake where the water must be very deep.
It's the creature,
whispers Sigurd.
His nostrils. He's lurking just below the surface, the rest of him drifting and coiling in the dark depths under the lake.
Go to hell. Those boulders are not the creature's nostrils. Playing games like that right before my eyes,
The boulders sink into the water like the fins of 2 diving sharks. Both of us stare at where we saw them, neither of us daring to speak. A moment later, a rippling wave rocks our boat from side to side. Sigurd whispers,
I think he knows we're here.
My skin crawls. My white-knuckled hands are frozen to the oars. Cold tingles prick my fingertips. The giant snake is back, tightening around my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs.
You, mentioned you wanted me to row.
I nod breathlessly. Sigurd frowns.
Are you all right? You're looking pretty pale.
I'm fine.
We'll need to switch places if you want me to take over. I can't row from back here.
I nod again and pull in the oars, sliding them under the seats. Steadying myself on the gunwale, I get up and step around the gear and weapons as I navigate toward the stern. Then Sigurd gets up too and tries to come up around me. Just wait until I get there. You're too heavy. He stumbles, throwing his whole weight to one side. The skiff rolls starboard, and my heart stops as we nearly take on water. Shuddering, I sink to my knees with a gasp.
What's the matter with you?
He says, lumbering past me to the bow. You nearly capsized us, idiot. He shrugs and reaches for the oars.
We didn't capsize. Look at you. You're trembling like a leaf, you're so scared.
I'm not scared.
Yes, you are. You're terrified. You don't like being on the lake with the creature swimming underneath us.
No, I don't. And I especially hate the idea of falling out into this black water with that thing around. Gods! Sigurd pulls the oars into his chest.
I can't say I'd be very fond of that either. But remember, the people of Frey's Island offer an annual sacrifice. In return, Fafnir does not harm them on the lake. We'll be safe from him until we reach his territory, and when we're there, we'll be facing him on land.
I feel another chill as more ripples rock the boat, and Sigurd looks over his shoulder, up the arm of the lake.
He must be heading back to his lair,
he says.
Fafnir is nocturnal. He'll sleep all day and come back out at sundown tomorrow.
I breathe a deep sigh of relief.
If you can,
says Sigurd,
you should try and get some sleep. You'll need your strength.
I take his advice and wrap my cloak tighter around my shoulders and sit back against the stern. But as I close my eyes, I'm swallowed up in black, boiling water.
Chapter 5 Frey's Island, Sweden. Gizur looks out over the lake with his hands on his hips. The island folk are gathered around, their faces grim as they watch the men bringing the bodies down from the watchtowers. Somewhere, a woman sobs. The chieftain appears at his shoulder.
They've taken a skiff,
he says, his voice laced with hostility and accusation.
It's as we feared. Astrid has already begun drawing lots for sacrifices. As we speak, my crew is readying my ship to go after them,
says Gizur. Perhaps we can stop them before they reach the Serpent's lands.
Will you come with me? I will. I'll go fetch my helm and sword.
But as the chieftain leaves his side to go up to the hall, he turns pale as bone, and a wail escapes his lips. Gizur whirls about. At the top of the hill, Astrid and several huskarls are leading the chieftain's daughters out of the hall. Astrid points at the chieftain.
Lord,
she shouts,
you welcomed the Frankish prince to our island. You brought him to the high table and let him feast at your right hand. Now he has betrayed us. Your guest has betrayed us. Therefore it must be your blood that appeases the serpent's wrath.
Gizur glances hurriedly between them.
Put the girls on my ship,
he says.
We're going after them. If you must offer sacrifices, you can do it at the edge of the creature's realm.
Astrid raises her chin.
As you wish, my king.
Trembling, the chieftain covers his hand with his mouth. Gizur grasps his arm and says to him in a low voice,
Fetch your sword and helm. I'll see no harm comes to your girls while they're on my ship, and if that witch tries anything without my approval, I'll hang her from the crossbar. As for Sigurd and the slave girl, they've only got a little skiff to take them across the lake and many miles upriver, while we have a Swedish warship and a crew of 60 men to row it. They'll have rowed all through the night, but with our speed, perhaps we can overrun them before they reach the poisoned valley and get our vengeance on them in the wild. Otherwise, they'll die within the serpent's smog." "And if not?" asks the chieftain. "Then, I suppose, we'll have to see what happens."
Chapter 6. The Damen River, Sweden. Hervor. The scrape of wood on gravel stirs me from my sleep, and I squint against the sun. Judging by its position in the sky, it's nearly noon, and I've slept through half the day. The terrain has become mountainous, and the forest is squished between rocky foothills. We're on a river, the Damen, I think. Sigurd's pulled the boat up on the bank and is trying to get a fire going. "Did you row all night?" I ask as I sit up, rubbing my neck where my slave collar used to be. He glances over his shoulder and adds some kindling to his tiny flame.
"Yes, and all morning. The sunrise was spectacular."
"Aren't you exhausted?"
"Not me,"
he says.
"I'm not tired at all. Just a bit hungry."
He comes over and reaches into the boat and drags this monstrous pike from under my seat. He proudly holds the fish up by the gills. He's a hideous-looking bastard, greenish-brown, and half as long as I am tall. Nice pike.
"You should have seen him fight,"
he says, grinning. I'm sure it was a thrill. I suppose you're expecting me to cook him?
"I think it's only fair,"
he says as I climb out of the boat.
"since I just rowed all night and half the day while you were sleeping."
Fine. I'll need a sharp knife. I take the pike and cut him across the neck and split him down the belly. Removing the fins, I slice 2 long fillets off the sides and throw away the head, guts, and middle. I rip out the rib bones and cut and peel out the Y bones in narrow strips of meat. Then I take the skin off the fillets. I cut into it and hold the knife in place, tugging and wiggling the skin over the blade to shave it off the meat. They're ready to be cooked, and as I grill them over the fire, Sigurd heads into the woods and comes back with a handful of speckled eggs. The pike is pretty tasty for a freshwater fish, and I'm feeling strong after slurping down a couple eggs. I would have liked some cabbage with it, though, with hearty bread and a side of crunchy red dulse gathered from the sea, and I'd kill a man for a drink of mead. I stomp out the fire when we're done, and Sigurd heads a little way downstream. He takes out a fold of white cloth, unrolls it, and spreads it out carefully on the riverbank. What he does next is pretty curious. He starts pissing all over it. When he's done, he shakes himself off, gathers it up in his hands, and wrings the piss out of it. He folds it into a triangle, and then, as if it isn't strange enough, he wraps it around his face, tying it behind his head and tucking the bottom into his shirt. Loki.
"Here's one for you,"
he says, tossing me another fold of cloth. It's a scarf of fine wool. And what am I supposed to do with this?
"The same as me. It will protect you from the poisonous fog that shrouds the valley ahead."
How can pissing in a cloth protect us? He shrugs.
"Magic, maybe? Gertrude only said it would protect us, and that without it, we will die before we get within 2 miles of the serpent's lair."
Fine. I head off and squat over the scarf. We get back in the skiff and I take another turn at rowing. I'm breathing in the sharp stink of piss with every exertion. Gods, I never knew how bad my own piss smelled until I soaked a scarf in it and wrapped it around my face. I just know I'll be smelling it for days, assuming we aren't killed in the next few hours. Sigurd straightens up in the stern and points past me upriver. I stop rowing and turn to look. Ahead, there's a yellow fog swirling over the river, shrouding the valley in ghostly vapors. Even through the piss-drenched scarf, I can smell the rotting eggs. I'm glad to be wearing it now. I tighten the knot behind my head. Sigurd slides Balmung from its sheath. He nods, and I grip the oars and take us deeper into the mustard-yellow mist. Yavel! It stings! It's hot and itchy on the skin. My eyes are burning. I gag and cough. Sigurd's coughing too, and squinting, tears running down his face. I can't breathe. I can barely row. We can't keep this up, I say, my voice hoarse and wheezing. We'll die.
No, we'll live. If this cloud of poison was going to kill us, we would already be dead.
Sigurd!
Keep rowing. This is how you'll win your fame.
Fy fan, I growl, pulling harder on the oars. I can't see 100 feet through this yellow fog, but I can see the shore. Dead trees, white as bone, stick up from the tainted earth. A warped and withered forest, or the skeleton of one, stripped bare by Fafnir's breath. The river's a funny color, too, brownish red. I wonder now if it was wise to eat that pike. The water must be full of poison, all the way to Frey's Island. After another few miles into this pestilent smog, the river widens, and I can't see the bank on either side. We could have rowed right out to sea, and I wouldn't know the difference. I can't see anything but yellow fog and filthy water. I can't take a full breath, either. Only short half-breaths, or the fog burns my throat and makes me cough. It's pretty hard to row without breathing. My head is swimming. I don't know how he expects to slay the creature in this fog. We keep starboard, and soon I see the bank again. Sigurd directs me up some tributary. It's no more than 60 feet across, but I can tell the water is deep. Very deep. I take us upstream another 2 miles. It's quiet here. No wind in the trees. No birds singing. Just our raspy breathing and my oars lapping this putrid stream. Then, a quiet rushing in my ears. A waterfall ahead. It seems strange there is a waterfall out here. I think of a waterfall and I imagine a rich forest and the smell of pine, mountains and air so clean it stings your lungs. I suppose that's how it was here once, before the serpent came. The stream opens into a wide pool, and from high above, water spills off the mountainside like a midwife pouring out a bucket. Sigurd shouts to me over the roar of crashing water.
This is it. Fafnir's lair.
I see nothing but a waterfall. How can this be his lair?
Underneath,
He says.
There's a cavern in the water that leads under the mountain. His treasure is there.
I peer uneasily into the reddish, foaming water. Something bumps against the side of the skiff. I nearly faint with terror, but it's only Sigurd rummaging through the gear in the bottom of the boat. There's a wooden shield, and the tremor I felt must have been him knocking it against the side. Sigurd stares at me. His gray eyes are red and itchy from the smog, but the way he's looking at me, I know he's smirking behind his scarf. It makes me think of Arnie. If he was here, he'd be making jokes for sure. The gods all know I could use a laugh about now. But Arnie isn't here. He's sailed on without me. Dwerg and Kimby, too. They've all set down their oars, and I'm the only one left rowing. Sigurd has dug out a shovel and a pickaxe from among the pile of weaponry. He points to shore, and I take us in, eager for once to be on land instead of water. We drag the skiff up on the bank. This red earth is hard as stone. I'm not looking forward to digging a pit in it. We trek a good half-mile inland, through the white trees, until we come to a clearing, and Sigurd says,
Here. We'll do it here.
He swings the pickaxe into the ground. Sigurd's the one with the blood of giants, so I let him break up the earth while I shovel it out. It's slow going, and we're choking and coughing as we work, our skin red and peeling from the sulphurous mist. After a while, we're up to our waists in a pit, but it has to be twice as deep and twice as long. Sigurd hacks away at the edges to widen it, and I shovel out the loosened dirt. And while he's digging deeper down, I use the shield to lug big heaps of reddish earth into the trees so it isn't obvious we've dug a pit. 2 more hours of heavy labor, and we've made a hole 6 feet long and 6 feet deep. I lean on my shovel, panting. Well, we've dug your grave. Now what? Sigurd looks down into the pit and unfurls a very tiny scroll.
I get down into the pit. We'll have to get some branches from over there to cover me up. Then you'll lure the serpent over to the pit, so I can skewer him with balmung.
Now, when you say lure the serpent...
Get him to chase you. You remember the pool with the waterfall? I think if you take the skiff out into the pool and wait for him to come out.
Then when he notices me, I'll row back to shore and run all the way back here with an enormous acid-breathing lake serpent right behind me.
Exactly.
So you'll just be waiting for me here, hidden in this pit?
Yes.
Simple enough.
Good.
He shields his eyes as he glances up at the sun.
We'd better get in position. We don't want to miss him.
We gather some white sticks and branches from the dead wood and lay them across the top of the pit, and before we close it up completely, Sigurd lowers himself into the hole. He looks up at me, his eyes gleaming from the shadows.
May Thor grant us courage,
He says,
and may Tyr guide our hands in battle.
I smile and nod. Then I wedge the last sticks in place to seal up the pit, spread some dirt over it, and head off for the skiff.
Chapter 7. Hervor. Suicide, that's what it is. Drifting around out in the middle of that pool, waiting to see the creature's shadow swelling in the depths below me. And then what? He'll knock the boat over just rising out of the water. If he doesn't, I'll get maybe 2 or 3 oar strokes before he blasts me with his acid breath, and my skin slides right off my bones. And if, somehow, I actually make it back to shore, I'm supposed to outrun him for a half-mile? That's stupid. It's a stupid plan with a tiny chance of success and a very, very high chance of dying in terrible agony. I might as well drown myself off the side of the skiff. I might as well have stayed in Frey's Island and let that vulva woman smear my guts all over the altar. I push the skiff into the water and take up the oars. Fortunately, Sigurd is pretty dumb. Thinking I'm going to wait out in this pool? Idiot. I'll be halfway back to Frey's Island. It's all easy downstream rowing, too. If I can get out of this smog before it gets too dark, I'll be a free woman. And Sigurd's left me everything I need. Weapons, a shift of mail, tools to build a fire, even a fishing line. God, Sigurd, you're dumb. Pretty soon, I'm a good mile or so downstream from the pool. I'm rowing hard, eager to get this piss scarf off my face and breathe fresh air once again. I'll spend the night in the forest. In the morning, I'll make my way back to Lake Storsen and hide out until it's dark again. I'll have to cut a few more throats, but if I can steal a small ship that I can steer and sail on my own, I'll have to burn all the other ships, so they can't chase me down the Indalsalven. No, that'll be risky and take too long. What I'll do is set fire to the hull and trap Gizur and the others inside. Then I'll burn the longships and head downriver to the coast, and make my way to Samsa Island. But then, I've given Sigurd my word. If I take off like this, I'll never live it down. I'll be need, truly. And even if no one ever knows, I'll know, and so will the gods. At least if I die, I'll die with bravery. With new resolve, I pull on the shirt of mail and start to steer the skiff around. Then an enormous shadow darkens the river. Needles prick my toes and fingers as it passes underneath, its vague and endless form spreading downstream. My heart throbbing in my throat, my bones melting in terror, I watch this long, black shape moving below me through the water. Something bumps the skiff. She rolls hard and nearly takes on water. I shoot my hands out for the sides and let the oars plop into the river. Hestkuk. The water's rippling. A long greenish fin cuts up through the surface. It's so long I can't see the end of it. It slithers through the water like a snake, like a tall line of slimy grass twisting through the river. The fin sinks back into the water, making little waves that rock the skiff and push me closer to shore. Another 20 feet to the riverbank. Just another 20 feet. I snatch the shield from the bottom of the boat and start paddling. 15 feet to go. 10 feet. A deep hiss, like a blowing whale, makes me whip back and stare over my shoulder. I can't see anything but a swirling yellow cloud. I paddle some more, then look again. Still nothing. The brownish water is getting choppy, like a strong wind is churning up the river. The skiff bobs and bounces on the waves. There's a rumbling growl like thunder from the treetops behind me. It sends a shiver through my bones. I stop, peering dizzily up into the poison haze. A snarl comes from the fog, like the grunt of an enormous bear, then a brighter puff of yellow mist. Then a vague shape drifts toward me. A monstrous shadow, rising sheer out of the water, swaying trance-like in the swirling vapors. The skiff crunches into the riverbank, and the world flips as I tumble backward off prow. I scramble to my feet, clawing for the spear at the bottom of the boat. Then the creature slithers into view, and the skin crawls between my shoulder blades as I gawk, frozen up at the ancient horror songs and legends have given the name Fafnir. Towering over me is something like a gigantic eel. Winding out of the river, the snake-like body is as tall as a cliff and as thick as a ship hull. The grayish hide is slick with mucus, alive with the movement of thousands of white worms. The neck, craning like a hideous swan, presents the creature's head. It's like a giant foreskin, with murky sky-blue eyes bulging out from either side. Overcome by instinct, my body moves on its own. With a cry of disgust, I hurl the spear with all my might. I've never thrown a spear so perfectly. It sails straight for the creature's face, and strikes the very center of its forehead. But the spearhead shatters like an icicle against his impenetrable hide, and the splintered shaft falls down into the river, where it lands with an unsatisfying splat. Stunned, I stare at the broken shaft floating in the water, crushed, like my chances of survival. Then, with mind-tearing dread, I look up as the creature's pink mouth gapes wide, brimming with circle upon circle of yellow teeth. That sight alone is nearly enough to make me faint with terror. But then, from his hook-fanged throat, an ear-splitting screech rips through the mustard smog, stopping my heart, and I scream like I've never screamed. Chapter 8. Hervor. Sigurd is my only hope. I run mad with terror through the dead woods. White branches reach out for me like hands of bone, whipping my face, clawing my hair as I crash through the skeletal forest. I feel neither pain nor exhaustion, only the cold clutches of fear gripping my limbs, and the voice screaming in my frantic mind to run faster, faster. Trees snap and crunch behind me. The thing is on land. Adrenaline surges through my body. Urged on by sheer instinctive horror, I sprint faster than the swiftest wolf, leaping, bounding, barging headlong through the rotting woods. There's a howling gasp above as the creature sucks in a humongous breath of dirty air, and I know what's going to happen next. With a yelp, I dive clear, narrowly escaping the corrosive blast. But as I get up, a high-pitched hissing fills my ears like sausages whistling over the fire, and with a cry, I drop the shield and claw the sizzling mail shirt off my back. Now my only defense, I snatch up the shield, expecting to see row upon row of the sucking lamprey teeth bearing down upon me, but the creature isn't there. I scan the swirls of mist, now an eerie orange in the red light of the setting sun. I can hear him moving around me, the shifting earth, the dull crack of trees snapping under his enormous weight. New panic washes over me. I scramble onward. To my horror, his bulky form cuts off the path ahead. He's surrounded me, encircled me with his body like a great wall. He's winding slowly over the red earth, coiling around me a little bit at a time. I whirl around, watching for his head lurking somewhere above me in the fog. I don't see it, but there's a white tree with a branch reaching out over his creeping mass. I fling the shield like a disc over to the other side and scale up the tree, the lower limbs creaking and bending under my weight. I reach for the intended branch, and hand over hand, I shimmy out to the end and swing back and forth, and back and forth, and back, and I vault myself over the creature, flicking through the slimy fin. The dry ground rises suddenly, slamming the air out of my lungs with a ringing burst of white light. Reeling, I stagger for the shield and fling a dead log up over the treetops. It crashes loudly further off, and through the fog, a shadowy shape arcs over the white woods. Again I hear that growling gasp, and I shudder as the hiss of melting trees whispers through the forest. Then another wraith-like screech shoots ice water through my veins, and the earth rumbles terribly behind me. I can't outrun him. Not for long. He's getting closer. Another few seconds of this frantic chase, and that gaping, jawless mouth will snatch me off the ground. Black horror seizes me. I'm not going to make it. I've run my course, and this is the end. Hell's cold hand is reaching out for me, and as her icy grip descends upon my shoulder, I shriek in utter desperation. And then, light through the trees ahead. I burst into the clearing, sprinting straight for Sigurd's pit, the ground trembling as our monstrous quarry thunders close behind. I leap over it, landing in a somersault. Rising, I twirl around, backing away, glaring up in terror as the creature rears over the pit and sucks in a massive breath to sizzle the flesh from my bones. At the top of my lungs, I scream, "Sigurd! Now, Sigurd!" There's a muffled shout. Screaming, I press my hands into my ears as a terrible screech pierces the sky. Blood bursts from the creature's underbelly. He reels back in agony, screeching and writhing in horrible contortions, spraying the clearing and white trees with great red spurts. But Fafnir is far from slain. He thrashes about, and the glimmer of steel catches my eye. Balmung, buried to the hilt in one of the serpent's many hearts, wrenched from Sigurd's grasp in the creature's sharp recoil. Sputtering and gasping for breath, a red, dripping figure crawls from the pit, now a scarlet pool flooded with the serpent's blood. I scream his name, and Sigurd staggers clear as an enormous coil smashes the ground with bone-shattering force. Again he leaps out of the way of Fafnir's crashing body, stumbling off balance from the violent impact, but he can only avoid those thrashing coils for so long. I snatch a stick up from the ground, and a shrill cry escapes my lips as I beat it hard against my shield. The repulsive head veers toward me. I've drawn his attention. I shriek an oath and hurl the stick up at his face. It glances harmlessly off his nostrils, and my stomach sinks as that hideous mouth opens wide. The diversion has only bought us several seconds, but Sigurd has used them well. With giant strength, he's scaling the trunk of the creature's erect body like some great slime-covered pillar, heedless of the thousands of parasitic worms wriggling against his face and squirming between his fingers. He is only feet away from reaching Balmung's hilt, but the serpent rolls and twists as it tries to shake him off. Then, with a shout, Sigurd leaps for his sword, catching it mid-air with a single hand, swinging perilously to and fro as the creature tosses its head viciously about. At last, Sigurd kicks both feet against the serpent's twisting underbelly, prying Balmung free and launching himself backwards into the air. My hair rising from my scalp, I hold my breath as he plunges 40 feet to the hard ground, flipping over at the last second and landing in a deep crouch, with an impact that would have splintered the bones of a mortal man. Awestruck, my heart is overflowing with admiration for my invincible companion. Our victory is near, and I can already feel my head swelling with legends that will be told of us. Our fame will spread across the earth. The Roman emperor will know my name, and even in faraway kingdoms of the Orient, brown-skinned princes in palaces of jade will eagerly ask to hear again the tale of Hervor, the serpent slayer. But as Sigurd charges roaring at the serpent, about to strike the killing blow, there's a howling gasp, a violent gust of wind, and he vanishes in a yellow cloud of death. Dumbfounded, I search the smog for any sign of life or movement, but there is no such sign. Sigurd's gone, just like that. Frozen in shock, I'm fastened to the ground. Hissing yellow nostrils swirl closer toward me. The tumbling cloud bulges and swells, only inches away. And then I do a foolish thing. In a defensive reflex, I thrust out my shield to fend off the danger. The shield foams like beer and melts, sizzling before my eyes. Then the sharp agony of 1,000 stinging wasps peels the last strip of sanity from my brain. Swarming with white fizz, my arm simmers and boils. Pink bubbles of flesh whistle and burst. And all the way up to the shoulder, my limb shrivels and dissolves, shrinking hideously into white, shining bone. Screaming, I collapse, writhing in terrible anguish as the corrosive mist creeps in around me. I have no thought of escape. Racked with pain, I cannot think at all, only squirm and sob into the earth as I wait for the creature's breath to consume me alive, like a hissing swarm of yellow, flesh-eating ants. The creature's head cranes toward me, the murky eyes wide and leering as it looks upon my inevitable demise. But then, just as the roiling acid cloud is about to fold over me, Balmung flashes in the red sun. Fafnir screeches. Blood squirts, snuffing out the cloud like a fire in the pouring rain. And suddenly, the air is clear around me. Fafnir's jaw gapes wide as he sucks in another breath, but Sigurd dashes in, and with an upward thrust, skewers him like a sausage. The creature shudders with a horrible spasm, wriggling violently. But as the towering neck retreats up into the air, Sigurd jumps high and catches one of the hook-like teeth. Hanging from the creature's mouth, he's swept up above the treetops, his arms stretched wide between the tooth and the hilt of his sword. He wiggles and punches the hilt deeper into the creature's throat, tormenting him, causing him to shriek terribly. Enraged, Fafnir whips his head back and forth, spewing blood. Using the momentum of the vicious motions to propel himself to an even greater height, Sigmund wrenches Balmung free and flings himself up over the flailing creature, landing with impeccable timing on the top of its head, and drives the 6-foot blade deep into his skull. At once, the murky eyes go dark. The great body stiffens, teetering like a massive tree trunk about to fall. Sigurd screams my name, and my pain vanishes for a frantic moment as I hurl myself clear of the toppling monster. Fafnir crashes dead behind me. Sigurd pries his crimson sword from the creature's brain, hops to the ground, and with 3 tremendous strokes, hacks off his head. A great font of blood spews from the gigantic stump. The rest of the body flops and wriggles like a fish on land. I black out as the pain returns.
Hervor.
Sigurd is leaning over me. He's completely red, soaked in blood from head to toe, except for his eyes, which are startlingly bright. His face is anxious.
Hervor.
My arm, I sob, and cry out in agony.
Here,
He says, scooping me up into his arms.
the serpent's blood is magic. See, it's mingling with the air and clearing all the poison from the valley. Had I not been drenched...
His voice fades as I swoon again. I slip back into unconsciousness as he sets me down beside the flooded pit. He dips what's left of my hand into the pool of Fafnir's blood. At once, the pain leaves, and my lips part in a long, silent gasp as a soothing heat washes through my arm. It's like easing into a volcanic hot spring in the middle of winter, but far, far nicer. I could lie here with my arm dipped in this pool of blood for the rest of my life. I have a deep urge to undress and bathe, to submerge completely in the steaming warmth, but Sigurd gently pulls me away. Rising, I hold up my dripping hand and sob. Magic indeed. Where I had dipped only a limb of bone into the pool, I have withdrawn a limb of living flesh. Fafnir's blood has completely restored my arm. Tears stream from my eyes as I look it over. Sigurd laughs in amazement. There is no sign that my arm was ever burned away down to the bone in Fafnir's acid breath. Nor is there any evidence I ever took part in slaying him. Chapter 9. It's the following morning, and Hervor is waiting for Sigurd in the skiff near the base of the waterfall. Cleansed by the serpent's blood, the river is now as fresh and clean as any mountain spring. Clean white water rushes off the mountainside. The pool below shimmers blue and silver and Hervor can see right to the bottom. The yellow mist that once hung over the valley is gone, and the birds are chirping among the white trees. Life is returning to the poisoned land. Sigurd surfaces with a gasp and swims for the skiff. Smiling, he reaches up for the side and slicks back his dripping hair. "Took you long enough," she says. "I assumed you'd gotten stuck and drowned. I was about to row away."
"And how are you going to do that, with the oars at the bottom of the river?"
She shrugs. "Did you find the creature's lair?" Her eyes ignite with an eager lust as a wide grin spreads across his face. "You did?"
"More gold than you could ever imagine."
"Show me at once. I want to see it."
"All right,"
he says, pushing away from the skiff.
"but it's a long way to the other end of the cavern. Are you a strong swimmer?"
Hervor stands up in the skiff. "I can swim as well as I can walk," she says. She peels off her dress and dives into the pool. At the bottom of the pool, where the water boils and glints in the sunlight, a huge cavern gapes like some aquatic creature's jagged mouth. There's a tinny rumbling overhead, and bubbles tickle Hervor's ears and back as she swims after Sigurd into the cave. Like giant fangs, stalactites hang from overhead. Stalagmites jut up from the cavern floor. Balmung trailing behind him on a rope looped around his waist, Sigurd propels himself from one stalactite to the next, no more than a white blur in the dim greenish blue ahead. Hervor does the same, exerting herself with growing urgency. Her lungs are ready to burst. A red cloud seeps from her nose. Then, a golden glow appears in the distance, like a sunset shining down into the water. She lunges for the final stalactite and launches herself into the golden rays, following Sigurd's ascent to the glimmering surface. She bursts from the water with a gasp. "Gods!" she croaks, wheezing for breath. Sigurd's already out of the water, his bare chest and trousers dripping onto the rocky ledge.
"I told you,"
he huffs. "Yes, but—" her voice trails off. Illumined by a red glow, the vast cavern is filled to the ceiling with great heaps of treasure, hills and hills of gold coins stamped with images of ancient kings, piles of gold goblets, plates, and drinking horns of the finest craftsmanship, strong boxes overflowing with gold chains and necklaces, bracelets and rings, all crafted with many-colored jewels, still more strong boxes of different sizes, ablaze with the rainbow light of every kind of precious stone, exotic carpets of vibrant hues with tassels of braided cloth of gold, rich garments for 1,000 kings and all their lords with gold-stitched hems and jeweled buttons, many crowns sparkling with rubies, sapphires, and square-cut emeralds, golden humes with scarlet plumes, gold shirts of mail and armored coats, jewel-encrusted swords and axes, every type of weapon forged in solid gold. She can't see the end of it. The glittering hoard spills on, deeper into the mountain. There must be more wealth stored up here than what's kept in the treasure houses of all the kings of the earth combined. "Loki's children," she whispers. She rises out of the water, causing Sigurd to look awkwardly away. "A fleet of 1,000 ships couldn't carry off this hoard, and you mean to just hand it all over to Gizur?"
"Yes,"
he says.
"It's Swedish gold, and I gave him my word. A single shipful is enough for me, and of course, you'll receive your portion."
But as Hervor looks out over the twinkling mounds rolling off into the cavern, her weight in gold seems like a meager bounty for the serpent's head. "What do you think Gizur will do with it all?" she asks. Sigurd shrugs.
"Whatever he wants. He'll probably load up a couple ships and go back to Uppsala. He'll make sure all his jarls and chieftains are wealthy men, but most of the treasure will just sit here under the mountain. Like you said, 1,000 ships couldn't carry off this hoard."
She scowls.
"But the real dilemma,"
says Sigurd,
"is how we're going to find Fafnir's ring."
"There are many rings here. How will you know when you find it?" Sigurd looks from side to side, then scoops up a jeweled goblet from the treasure heap.
"With this, I'll just fill it with water from the pool here. Then I'll dip each ring into it. If it's Fafnir's ring, when I dip it into the water, it will produce a second identical ring.
Then there could be hundreds of magic rings.
No, only the original will produce a duplicate.
Fair enough. Let me know when you find it.
You aren't going to help me look?
No. You're only going to give me my own weight in gold. It's going to be a lot of work looking through all this treasure and choosing such a small amount. I'd better get started right away.
Sigurd swears under his breath and starts rummaging through a box of jewelry. The mounds of gold are parted by a slithering trail, and Hervor wanders deeper into the cavern.
Isn't it kind of strange, she says, for a serpent to have a magic ring? He has no fingers.
They say Fafnir was once a dwarf, a water spirit who dwelt in the stones along the bed of the Dammon River. You know, I think I saw some nice shirts over there. Would you please put one on?
They're probably too big.
I don't care. Put some clothes on. He throws away the box of jewelry and squats down, sifting through the treasure at his feet. Hervor spreads a collection of fine garments out before her. She runs her hand over a gold-hemmed tunic of red, crushed velvet, then props up a polished golden shield and combs her fingers through her wet hair, watching Sigurd in the reflection. His back is to her. Balmung is lying on the ground beside him, just out of reach. The tunic falls down to her knees, and she fastens a silver-studded belt over her hips. She holds up a shirt of golden chain and smooths it against her supple form. She grins as she places a golden helm on her head, set with a bull's horns and a flowing crimson plume. Her grin widens as she sees a purple cushion in the reflection, sitting at the top of a golden mound.
Idiot,
she whispers, eyeing Sigurd coolly before scampering up the glittering hill. Resting ceremoniously in the center of the cushion is a gold ring. It's a crude design, misshapen, almost soft in appearance, as if a touch of firm pressure could still mold it. Unlike the extravagant trinkets that make up the serpent's hoard, which are beset with so many flashing jewels, this ring is plain gold. There's a crude triangle etched on it, next to a circle with a dot in the middle. Surely, obviously, this is Fafnir's magic ring. "Sigurd," she calls. "I found—" But as her fingers hover over the ring, a dark thought enters her mind. Perhaps Sigurd perished while slaying the creature. What if he had died bravely, pinning the serpent down with his giant strength while she struck the fatal blow with Balmung? All of this would be hers. There would be a matter of transporting it, but if, say, she proceeded with her original plan of falling upon Frey's Island in the night, with Gizur out of the way and none of those wretched inhabitants left alive, no one would know of the location of the treasure or that Fafnir had even been slain. She could take a little bit with her now, enough to fill a helm, and then return with a fleet of ships. She could even fulfill Sigurd's mission and bring Fafnir's head and magic ring to Gunther in Burgundy. Word of her deed would spread quickly throughout Europe. She'd be the most famous person on earth, and wealthier than all the kings combined. She could sail to Denmark with an army. She could buy Denmark, venture to her father's tomb on Samsa Island, and claim Tyrfing as a queen in splendor. "I found my crown," she says, tossing off the plumed helm and fitting an elegant tiara into her hair. "What do you think? Does it suit the Princess of Lofoten?" "What I think," Sigurd seethes, "is that I'm never going to find this ring. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. No, worse. It's like looking for a particular straw of hay in a whole hayfield. It's impossible." Hervor examines a jeweled dagger. The blade is as wide as 2 of her fingers and about 6 inches long. The hilt is solid gold. 2 yellow sapphires are set in the crossguard. A third is set in the pommel. "You mean you still haven't found it yet?" "Of course I haven't found it yet. I wish you'd help me look at least." She tests the edge of the blade against her fingertip. Her skin parts at the slightest pressure, causing a red tear to dribble down her finger. Sharp as the kiss of Judas. "Oh, well, this wouldn't be it here, would it?" she says innocently, tucking the dagger discreetly against her thigh, concealing it in the folds of her tunic. "What wouldn't?" "This ring on this cushion. Come look." With an oath, Sigurd comes clambering up the shifting pile of treasure with his goblet of water.
He has left Balmung lying at the bottom of the heap.
"Oh, yes,"
he says, dropping to his knees beside her.
"Yes, this must be it. Let's test it out."
He plucks the ring up from the cushion and dips it into the goblet. At once, a second ring falls out of the first and clinks to the bottom of the cup. Sigurd stares at Hervor in amazement, then dips the ring again, producing a third ring at the bottom of the goblet.
"Are you seeing this? Look, Incredible! This is it!"
Loki, Can I try it?
"Yes, here."
But while Sigurd is still forming the sentence, Hervor strikes like a death adder. Chapter 10. "For Arnie," she snarls. She gives the blade a vicious twist and drags it up along his belly. She yanks it free. Sigurd crumples over her shoulder, pale with shock. The weight of the hulking champion nearly knocks her down, but black fire ignites within her heart as she gives in to the consuming rage that's been slumbering patiently inside her. For Kimby! She sticks the knife in him again. And every man aboard the Gellir! She stabs him and stabs him again, screaming, causing her victim to jerk and shudder with each murderous thrust. Then she raises the blade over her head, and with a wild shriek, plunges the dagger into his neck, severing his jugular arteries and driving 6 inches of steel through his spine. But where the dagger should be sunk to the hilt in Sigurd's flesh and bone, it clatters to the ground. A chill runs through her veins, and she darts away from him in sudden fear. The red mist clears from her eyes. Panting, she looks down at her hands. Not one single drop of red. She should be up to her elbows in his blood, the way she was gutting him. And Sigurd, he should be ripped wide open. He should be lying dead at her feet, with his bowels spilling out of his stomach. But as it is, he too is looking himself over in a daze of bewilderment. There are no stab wounds where the blade punctured him, no wide gashes where she dragged the knife up along his belly. Not one speck of red is on him. He's completely unharmed.
"The creature. Fafnir's blood has made me."
He snatches up the dagger and slashes his palm. The blade does not cut him. His eyes grow even wider with astonishment.
I'm invincible."
He rises suddenly, his eyes smoldering with anger and betrayal.
"You tried to murder me."
The hair on the back of her neck stiffening in alarm, her mind reeling over the startling and impossible turn of events, Hervor stares at him, white-faced and motionless. Balmung, if it could carve through Fafnir's impenetrable flesh, it should be able to chop through Sigurd's too. She scrambles down the treasure heap, coins and gold ornaments clattering behind her. Sigurd skids after her, red in the face and bellowing like a raging bull.
"You wicked girl! I trusted you with my life. We slew the serpent together. I thought we'd forged a friendship in the flames of peril."
Hervor dives for the gigantic sword. It's incredibly heavy. It takes all her strength just to swing it off the ground. Sigurd ducks under the whirring blade, throwing his arm over his face as gold coins sprinkle in every direction. Hervor loses her footing. She scrambles upright, and with great exertion, she thrusts the heavy sword toward him. Sigurd steps aside, and she falls flat on her face. He lunges for her, snarling, but she rolls aside. She bolts upright and darts away. Then her feet are swept from under her. She yelps, airborne. There's a burst of white stars as she cracks her head against the ground.
"Come here, you!"
Sigurd roars, clutching her by the ankle. Shrieking at the top of her lungs, she claws the stone floor of the cavern as he drags her back toward him, kicking frantically at his face with her other foot.
"It's no use. My flesh is like iron. I can barely even feel... Ugh!"
Hervor drives her heel into his eyeball, causing him to release her as his hand shoots up to his face. Sigurd staggers to his feet, barking an oath, blinking his eye and propping it open with his fingers. A blurry worm lingers in his vision as he scans the glittering mounds, but she's already out of sight. He holds his breath and listens carefully. No shifting coins or quiet footsteps. She could be hiding anywhere. He stoops down and reaches for Balmung, his eyes and ears strained for a glimpse of motion or some faint sound that might give her away. But after several moments of watching and waiting, his anger fades, and with a shrug, he ventures back up to the top of the treasure pile to play with the serpent's ring. But as he dips the ring into the goblet, no duplicate appears as it did before. He frowns, realizing he must be holding one of the copies generated from the original. He sets it aside on the cushion and plucks one of the imitation rings from the bottom of the goblet. One by one, he tests each ring, but none of them produces a duplicate. He starts to panic. Perhaps he dropped it. He searches through the treasure at the top of the mound. Finding nothing, he tests the ring again. No. No! He hurls the goblet at the wall of the cavern.
Hervor!
His rage rekindled, he slides down the hill of gold and sprints deeper into the cavern. On either side of him, the piles of treasure decrease in size, the red glow of gold growing dimmer and dimmer. The cavern narrows, and soon he has to turn and shuffle sideways. The rough stone closes in against him, pressing into his chest and back.
No! Hervor!
He grunts and wiggles, but is unable to push any further. The black sliver of shadow ahead is only wide for a dwarf to pass through, or perhaps a slender woman. He swears in frustration and tries to back out of the crevice, but in his anxious haste, he's already squeezed himself in too far. A foul oath erupts from his throat. He can hardly even budge. Hervor inches deeper into the crevice, chuckling to herself as Sigurd's booming shouts echo from the darkness behind her. She sidles further into the gloom. All around her, water drips from the damp stone. It's completely black, like the cell beneath her grandfather's hall. But as the darkness yielded to the glow of her grandfather's torch spilling into the cell, and thus lumining her means of escape, a splinter of light appears, gray at first, then white. Her blue eyes blaze fiercely from the blackness as rays of sunshine peer into the crevice. Her white teeth gleam wickedly, her left hand flashing with the glint of gold. In the heat of the altercation, she swiped the serpent's ring. Chapter 11. The Dammon River, Sweden. Gizur gnaws on his thumbnail as he peers suspiciously upriver. They spent the night at the edge of the serpent's territory, camping a healthy distance away from the yellow fog. But in the darkness, they had not noticed the mist had dissipated. At dawn, they rose to find the air ahead to be clear and sweet, and the water clean and blue. Just now they're rowing upriver to investigate, the Swedish oarsmen warily rolling their eyes among the forest of dead white trees. The chieftain and his daughters watching with curious attention and relief. Astrid the seer, unusually silent and fearful. They hear the rush of the waterfall long before they reach it. When they arrive, they find only the empty skiff bobbing in the pool.
Where could they be?
Asks the chieftain. Gizur shrugs. Hell would know. Let's go ashore and send out scouts. If their bodies haven't disintegrated in the serpent's breath, we'll find them eventually. At this rate, with the changes we've seen, I'd say we're more likely to catch them coming out of the creature's lair with armfuls of gold. The chieftain looks at him hopefully.
Do you believe it's possible?
You said yourself that the pure air in the valley is a sure sign of Fafnir's demise. All we can do is watch and wait. We'll see what the men turn up. In the meantime, let's have someone get a fire going. Loki, it's chilly out. The long ship is drawn up alongside the riverbank. Armed with bows and axes, half the crew ventures out into the woods in pairs. The other half remains with the ship, leaning on their spears as they eye the dead trees uneasily. A group of them sit cross-legged next to the fire, playing a game of knucklebones. The chieftain's daughters watch them from nearby. One of the younger Swedes grins up at them, causing them to giggle quietly and twirl their hair around their fingers. Gizur peers at them from the corner of his eye, as he stokes the hot coals, then glances at Astrid over the crackling flames. "What a relief it must be that you no longer have to sacrifice the young women of your village," he says. "The people of Frey's Island will finally be able to prosper without having to look to you for constant deliverance from the wrath of an enormous lake serpent." Astrid looks up at him, but says nothing. "Where do you think you will go now?"
What do you mean?
she asks.
I'm not going anywhere.
Well, it just seems like you no longer have a purpose on Frey's Island, since there won't be any more sacrifices.
What are you talking about? Of course there will be sacrifices. We can't just stop offering sacrifices to the gods all of a sudden, just because it seems like Fafnir might be dead.
It's pretty obvious he is dead.
Well, yesterday I was supposed to sacrifice that slave girl on Frey's altar.
Exactly. Slaves. Of course they'll still be sacrificing their slaves to Frey and Odin, and perhaps once in a while a brave soul might be willing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of the village, but any chieftain can perform that kind of sacrifice, so it just seems that they don't really need you anymore. And if you stick around, you'll just be a dark rain cloud for everyone, a constant reminder of how you fed their children to a hideous monster. That's not exactly conducive to a positive atmosphere in which a community of like-minded individuals can all thrive together. Unfortunately, I think it's for the best that you leave Frey's Island." Astrid looks in bewilderment to her chieftain, who nods slowly in agreement, his eyes downcast.
Seriously? This is unbelievable.
Actually, from everyone else's perspective, it's quite easy to believe. You carry an aura of dread and unease. No one feels comfortable with you around. And, as the King of Sweden, I have to think about what's best for my subjects. Otherwise, I wouldn't be much use to anyone, and people wouldn't like me. Somewhat like yourself. So, after we finish up here and get back to the village, you'll pack up your things and go live elsewhere. Possibly somewhere deep in the wilderness, away from everybody.
You can't do this to me,
hisses the seeress.
I am the voice of the gods.
You were the voice of terror and oppression, says Gizur. And frankly, Sigurd was right about you all this time. If I had listened to him, I would have helped him slay the serpent and become one of the most famous people on earth. But because of your negative influence, I decided not to help him. Now, instead of being incredibly famous, I only have an immense hoard of treasure sitting around here somewhere. I'm feeling pretty sure about that, so you should be grateful I'm offering you the chance to leave the village. Quite honestly, if it wasn't for your merciful chieftain, I'd have already killed you in some extremely unpleasant way. Astrid shuts her mouth and draws her shawl tighter around her shoulders, staring worriedly into the fire. Well, says Gizur, drumming his thighs as he gets up. It's that time of the morning for me. I'll be back in 10 or 20 minutes. Gizur trudges into the withered woods until he can no longer see the flames flickering through the white trees or hear the laughter and gruff voices of his men. He shrugs against the sharp fall chill, looking about as he unbuckles his leather belt and drapes it over a low branch with his purse pouch and sax knife. Then he drops his trousers, bunches up his tunic, and squats with a grunt over the red earth. A twig snaps nearby. Gizur stiffens and rolls his eyes. "Do you mind giving me a little privacy, please?" he says. "I'm trying to do my business over here." Quiet footsteps move in swiftly behind him. Hissing an oath, he snatches up his trousers and whirls around. There's no one there. Then movement catches his eye, his belt swinging on the branch. Before he can react, he feels a sharp metal blade pressing up under his jaw. He whispers an oath, cautiously raising his hands. A woman hisses quietly into his ear, her hushed voice laced with terse aggression. Her hot breath on the back of his neck is like the panting of a wild dog.
"I wouldn't make a peep if I were you."
"I'm not sure you've thought through this." She gives him a warning shush and presses the knife more firmly into his skin as he turns his head slightly toward her. Do you want me to cut your throat with your own sax?
If you had any sense, you would have done that already. But as it is,
a crunch in the woods behind them causes his assailant to twirl him around and duck behind his shoulder.
You're just as stupid as every other woman.
2 Swedish scouts stalk out of the trees, one slowly circling to flank her with a shield and raised axe, the other standing cool, motionless, his bowstring drawn back to his ear. "Tell them to drop their weapons," she says dryly, "or I'll cut your throat from ear to ear."
"That's not going to happen,"
says Gizur.
"See that man with the bow? His name is Stig. I've seen him pin a hummingbird to a tree trunk. He'll sink an arrow through your skull before you can even break my skin. The only reason he hasn't done it yet is that he knows I'd prefer to capture you alive."
He shivers.
"I'm already getting chills just thinking about the fun we're going to have with you."
The woman hisses an oath. In the same instant, the man with the axe and shield steals to the side. In a defensive reflex, she whips the sax from Gizur's throat and points it at the advancing Swede. "That's close enough." She yelps in surprise as her hand kicks back with a sharp clang, and the sax goes spinning from her grasp. Before she can react, Gizur thrusts his elbow into her stomach, whirls around, and clubs the side of her head with both fists. His runaway slave girl staggers drunkenly and slumps against a white tree, her hand sluggishly reaching for the fallen blade. But the scout with the axe kicks it away and hauls her up by the arm as his partner closes in with a second arrow in his bow.
"Can you believe the audacity of this woman?"
says Gizur as he fastens up his trousers.
"And people find it curious I haven't taken a wife. Loki, held up by my own thrall maiden while... caught me with my pants down. Gods in Asgard. Phew! Okay, I just need a moment to cool off here. My hands are shaking. All right, get this wretch back to camp. And Stig,"
says Gizur, tightening his belt,
"better have a few of those handsome young fellows take the chieftain's daughters for a stroll."
Chapter 12. Gizur's men drag Hervor back to their camp on the riverbank and lash her to a tree in a sitting position with her arms over her head. They bind her tight to the point of cruelty, as if they're making every effort to punish her. The chieftain and that Volva woman frown down at her, perplexed. The Swedes gather around, murmuring quietly, pointing at her majestic tunic. Excitement stirs in their voices. She's been in the serpent's lair. Fafnir is dead and the treasure is real. At last, Gizur returns from the woods, peeling the skin off an apple with the edge of his sax, and the Swedes make way for him as he saunters into their midst. He stands over her, scratching his stubbled chin, watching her thoughtfully. Then he flicks his fingers to either side. Logs. Snarling, Hervor kicks viciously at her captors as they pry apart her legs. Then, driving wooden stakes into the ground, they lash her ankles in place so that she's spread-eagled before them. Gizur smiles and carves off another apple slice.
"Stig."
The Swedish archer crouches by the fire and lifts a red-hot peg out of the embers with a pair of tongs and brings it to the king. It's about 6 inches in length, a hinge pin used to bolt a plowshare to an oxen's yoke. Gizur squats in front of her, his eyes locked with hers. She curses and turns from the sweltering heat as he tilts the scorching firebrand toward her face.
"Where are your nerves of steel now, You don't want me to sear your cheek? No, I won't do that. Maybe if one of my thralls broke something expensive by accident."
He smiles darkly and pushes the hem of her tunic up past her hips.
"But my own thrall maiden sneaking up on me while I'm conducting my personal business."
Her heart sinks as he lowers the glowing rod between her legs. The intense heat toasts her inner thighs. She starts to shake. She looks up at Astrid, who as a fellow woman must have some sympathy, but she finds no pity in the eyes of the seeress. Some of the men are grinning and moving closer, eager to watch her torment, but most are like the chieftain, who seemed to take no thrill in her sick torture. but still looks grimly on with a hardened heart. Gizur taunts her with the molten iron, prodding it back and forth just inches from her flesh. Hervor bares her teeth. She breathes in terse hisses. The hot iron moves closer, closer. Suddenly Hervor shouts, "All you Swedes can go to hell! Is this how you treat the girls you capture? Gods! At least in Norway, men know what to do with women." Gizur smiles. "What a brave girl! But you should probably be begging for mercy instead of talking tough." "All I'm saying," Hervor says, "is it's no wonder my Uncle Hjorvard saw fit to marry Princess Ingeborg. It seems to me he was only trying to rescue her when he took Hjalmar to the Hjom." Gizur turns white as a sheet. "That's right. It was my father who slew Hjalmar the Greathearted in the duel on Samsa Island. I am Hervor Angantir's daughter, Princess of Lofoten, and I say, Gizur, you're not a man. Where were you the other night while Sigurd and I stole off to risk our lives and kill the serpent? Lounging by the fire in the nice warm hall? Drinking mead and enjoying the company of older men?" She glances up at the chieftain, who steps back and looks in disbelief to King Gizur, who has turned to stone, speechless with wrath. "I thought there was something a little odd," she says, "about the way you looked at Sigurd and all the slave boys in your hall, and then when you embraced your old friend here when we arrived at Frey's Island. I'm not oblivious, Gizur, to my own beauty. I used to sail with a raiding crew. Most men would be eager to have a go with me. But here I am, tied up and spread-eagled at your mercy, and this is all you want to do? It's clear you're not interested. I'd say it's pretty obvious that instead of a woman's warmth, you'd rather feel the intrusion of another man." The Swedes gasp. The chieftain claps his hand over his mouth, and Astrid the seeress perks up her chin, her eyes suddenly alight with the thrill of opportunity, as Gizur's rage erupts at last. "You slut!" he roars. "I'll fry your innards!" Hervor speaks quickly, pressing back against the tree trunk. "Not very tough of you, torturing a helpless woman. If you had an eel between your legs, you'd take me to the Hjom." "Nice try, but slaves can't challenge their masters to a duel. Now, Princess Angantir's daughter, prepare yourself for extreme agony." Her efforts exhausted, Hervor grits her teeth and leans away as Gizur extends the bright hot pin.
Stop!
Cries Astrid, stepping in and grabbing onto the tongs.
In the name of the gods, restrain your king!
At once, many hands pull Gizur away, and Hervor sighs with deep relief.
You are all witnesses,
shouts Astrid, raising her staff,
that this woman, Hervor Angantir's daughter, from the land of the high fire, has accused Gizur Yngvason, king of Sweden, of need and erg, and has challenged him to the right of Hjolmgang. According to Scandic law, he must accept her challenge and strike her to the death within the dueling bounds, or die bravely in the eyes of the gods. Should he refuse to meet her challenge, then her accusations remain undisputed. He must be stripped of his kingship and become an outlaw among our people. It will be the duty of every man to hunt him down and kill him."
"What is this?" cries Gizur, his neat hair coming wildly out of place as he struggles against the restraint of his men. "She is my slave girl. By law, she is unable to challenge me. Unhand me at once." Astrid looks between Hervor and the king.
I see no slave collar around her neck to indicate she is your property. She is, by all accounts, a free woman. Unbind her."
Hervor grins smugly as the men untie her wrists and ankles. Gizur boils over. "You bitches! You're in league against me. I can see it all over your faces. You want to go to the Hjom? Fine. I'll chop your legs off. And you," he snarls, turning to the Volva priestess, "just you wait."
There is a small island a mile west of Frey's Island,
says the chieftain.
where disputes have traditionally been settled. The duel will take place there in 3 days' time. I don't want to wait 3 days,
Screams Gizur.
let's do it now, right now.
The chieftain extends his hand.
My king, it is the law.
Such a custom may be overruled,
Says Astrid.
if the other party is in agreement.
She looks eagerly to Hervor as Gizur's men hoist her to her feet.
What say you to this?
I say,
Growls Hervor.
we better not keep hell waiting.
Chapter 13. Dressed in a mail shirt belonging to one of the slimmer Swedes, and armed with shield, sword, and sax, Hervor faces the Swedish king across the dueling bounds. 4 spears have been thrust into the riverbank 12 paces apart to mark the corners of a square, and the chieftain is drawing lines in the red earth between them with his heel. When he's done, she and Gizur step inside the square, and the Swedes close in around the outside of the boundary, boxing them in with walls of brightly colored shields. The 3 daughters have returned to the camp. They look curiously over the shoulders of the men as they ask their father what's going on. A few of the Swedes are murmuring to one another, and Hervor smirks as she hears the clink of money. Gizur shrugs his shoulders and tilts his head from side to side. He's not much broader than she is, and he's an inch shorter. He might be a skilled warrior, lithe and quick with sharp technique. That would be dangerous, but he doesn't have the hard gaze of a man who's faced death too often. It was a lot of work for Sigurd to convince him to help him slay the creature, and even then he backed out at the final minute. She snickers as he smooths his hair over with his free hand. She'll split him like a block of wood. The shield wall parts for the chieftain and the vulva priestess to come into the dueling bounds. Astrid takes off her dark blue cloak and spreads it on the ground in the center of the ring. Without it, she looks like an ordinary woman. She beckons for Hervor and Gizur to step forward onto the cloak. The chieftain looks grimly at them both.
These are the rules for the Hjomgang of Hervor Angantir's daughter and King Gizur Ingvason,
He says.
The duel will take place within these bounds. To leave the bounds voluntarily for any reason is to be guilty of need, but we will prevent that from happening. As the offended party, Gizur will strike the first blow. Hervor is allowed to block, duck, or jump into the air, but neither of the contenders is permitted to step off the cloak until after the first blow is struck. Once the first blow is delivered, the duel shall commence, and Hervor and Gizur shall strike each other to death. If either Hervor or Gizur attempts to flee from the other, they have abandoned their honor and become an outlaw and must be killed. If Hervor strikes a blow before Gizur, she must be killed immediately. If any man or woman should step into the dueling bounds once the duel is in motion, they must be killed. Lastly, if any man or woman interferes with this Hjomgang in any way, from within or without the dueling bounds, they must be killed. Now,
Says the chieftain.
you will both recite the rules back to me.
Gizur repeats the rules, then Hervor. When they're finished, Astrid steps onto the cloak between them. With her staff in hand, she raises her arms and cries out to the heavens,
Frey, God of our island, God of our people, we pray your blessing upon this Hjomgang. Look in favor upon the one whom the Norns have deemed worthy. May they strike the other down with fierce and noble violence. May their lifeblood be a sacrifice in your honor, and may their death send your smile upon us.
A moment of silence is kept, and the white trees creak and groan as a gentle wind blows through the valley. From the corner of her eye, Hervor glances beyond the Swedes to the empty skiff still bobbing in the pool near the waterfall. She should finish up quickly and be on her way. Astrid lowers her arms, and the Swedes part as she and the chieftain leave the dueling bounds. Then the chieftain shouts,
Let the Hjomgang begin!
Hervor rises on the balls of her feet, pinned with steel spring tension as Gizur raises his sword. A blow to the left side would be swift and deadly, but she needs only raise or drop her shield to catch it. He'll strike at her right side, where she's more open, but then she'll have more time to see it coming. He'll feint to throw her off. A white flash dazzles the corner of her eye as Gizur's sword jerks abruptly forward, a fake to the upper left. His blade swoops sharply for her knee. She lowers her shield to catch the blow, but instead of the dull thud of steel on wood, a deafening silence stops her heart. A second feint. Instincts blazing, she ducks quickly, her ears buzzing as Gizur's blade sings barely an inch overhead. She survived the first strike. White pain shoots up her shoulder as his shield slams hard into her sword arm. She growls, tightening her grip on the hilt, raising her own shield to meet his descending blade. She drives her knee into his stomach. He pitches over with a gasp, but recovers quickly, deftly leaning away from her lethal swipe. The two circle each other around the dueling bonds, eyes locked, weapons poised. With sudden explosiveness, Hervor attacks, yelling hotly as she and Gizur clash in a flurry of vicious blows. When the clamor ceases and the two back away again, Gizur's nose is bloody from a stiff knock from the rim of Hervor's shield. He sniffs and spits aside a reddish gob. Then, as Gizur continues to circle his opponent, a peculiar change comes over her. There's a snarl in her rapid breath. Her white face, once creased with hate, is now blank, and her eyes, which seconds ago were ablaze with blue fire, are now eerily distant, dreamlike, like the bewitched eyes of a wolf gazing at the moon. There's an unsettling absence about her that causes the hair on the back of his neck to stand up. She comes at him with startling ferocity, shrieking madly. He steps back, his courage melting. Her blows are lightning quick, and it requires every ounce of his strength, skill, and desperation to defend against her frantic onslaught. But he can't keep it up for long. Each moment of retreat seems to draw her to even greater fury. Then, with unnatural strength for a woman, she cleaves his shield straight through the boss. Her sword is wedged deep, and with a quick flick of his wrist, he twists his shield and sends it spinning aside, wrenching the blade from Hervor's grasp, delivering a sharp thrust with his own. In her normal state, he would have pierced her skull, but in her frenzy, she moves with the speed of a diving falcon, and his blade merely nicks her cheek. Roaring, she plows him over. Battered and bloody, Gizur cries out, rolling desperately aside as she slams the edge of her shield into the ground. She brings it down again. He throws aside his sword, catches the shield with both hands, and kicks her away. But before he can rise, she's on him again, her eyes glaring and wild, her lips drawn back from her gritted teeth, foam and spittle dangling from her chin, as she beats down on him with endless vigor. At last he manages to throw her off, flipping her head first over top of him. He scrambles to his feet, panting and staggering drunkenly, blood dripping from his shattered lips. But as Hervor rises, blue steel flashing in her hand, Gizur's spirit fails. He stumbles away with a heavy sob, but she snatches him by the hair and yanks him to his knees. He resists her with all his might, as she lifts her sax to his forehead. The chieftain's daughters shrug and cringe, and the youngest averts her eyes from the grotesque affair. Their father and the other Swedes look on with phlegmatic grimness, while Astrid stares with eager fascination as Gizur's shout of protest rise into squeals of terrible agony as Hervor peels back his scalp. But before she can expose more than a small white patch of skull, Sigurd barges into the ring, slams his fist into her stomach, and drops her like a bag of rocks. There is a moment of silence in which the only sounds are the whimpers of the Swedish king. Then, with a cry of outrage, Astrid shoves her way into the dueling bounds and thrusts a long-nailed finger at the Frankish prince.
"Foreign fiend! You offend the gods!"
She turns to the others, her voice shrill with anger.
"Noble Swedes! This foreign prince has interfered with the sacred rite of Hjómgang. He is an outlaw. It is the duty of every man to strike him down and—"
Balmung whirls, and Astrid's head goes spinning off her shoulders, thudding gruesomely against the painted shields. Bare-chested and dripping from the river, Sigurd eyes the Swedes surrounding him.
"It's a short trip to hell,"
he says,
"if any of you want to join your Volvo witch."
The Swedes all stare in silent wonder, but no man makes a move. They look awkwardly at one another, wondering what happens now. Finally, the chieftain steps toward him.
Is it true you've killed the serpent?
It is.
You'll find his corpse a mile inland on the other side of the river. You need not live in fear any longer, and you're now all rich as lords.
The chieftain clasps his hands over his mouth, and tears of joy spring into his eyes. His daughters embrace him and stare at Sigurd in amazement, and the Swedes disperse to see Fafnir's body for themselves. Whining in pain, Gizur rises to his feet, his hand pressed firmly over his bleeding scalp.
It seems to me I just saved your life,
says Sigurd.
Yes,
says Gizur, wincing.
And you have my gratitude. Perhaps you'd like another 3 ships filled with the serpent's treasure to take back with you to Xanten? You'd be offering me 20 ships if you knew how much gold is down there. I've just made you the richest man in all of Midgard.
Even in the midst of his pain, Gizur can't resist a smile.
Aye. Well, 20 shipfuls then. 1 ship of treasure is enough for me,
he says, stooping over Hervor's unconscious body and plucking the serpent's ring from her finger. He holds it up and looks it over.
That's what we agreed on. Yes. We also agreed that you'd help me slay the creature, but you didn't keep your end of the bargain. You backed out at the last minute, and a slave girl took your place. Is that really how you want people to think of you?
Gizur's eyes sharpen with anger.
Why don't you just tell me what you want?
Sigurd drapes Hervor's limp form over his shoulder and rises, grinning.
You know exactly what I want,
he says. He jabs his finger into Gizur's chest.
And you better keep your word this time. We'll be counting on you.
Chapter 14. The Cattegat. It's been 8 days since the Hjomgang, and Sigurd and his crew are en route to Worms. The Frankish vessel is riding precariously low as it glides through the green waves, weighted down with heavy heaps of glittering cargo. A dozen Sweden ships escort them, 2 of which carry Fafnir's grisly head, which was so big it couldn't fit aboard a single ship and had to be hewn apart. Sigurd watches them from the prow, the sharp fall wind whipping his face. He'll be glad when he's sitting by a warm fireplace in Gunther's palace, recounting his perilous adventure to his friend. He chuckles to himself as he imagines the look on Gunther's face when he sees him coming up the Rhine. There can be no bad blood between them now. Not only has he fulfilled his quest, returning with Fafnir's head and magic ring, he's gone the extra mile and brought back another gift, which Gunther has long coveted. In his left ear he wears a green earring, part of an emerald pear which once belonged to Princess Ingeborg, a sign of Gizur's sworn allegiance against the Romans. Even Brunhilde will be speechless with amazement. He can't help but feel a sense of pride. He's overcome her feminine wiles and defeated her again. Yes, he'll receive a hero's welcome. Forget betrothal. He'll be married to Gertrud by the end of the month. The thought of it puts him in such high spirits, he decides he'll even let Gunther parade him through the city. As a show of their impregnable friendship, they'll pass together under the Arch of Triumph. He sighs as he tests the point of a jeweled dagger against his finger. There's still one loose end remaining. It'll be an ugly business, and he's looking forward to putting it behind him. As the red sun begins to set over the Danish waters, a purple strip of land comes into view on the horizon. The skipper makes his way up from the stern and speaks to him in a low voice. Sigurd looks back to where Hervor is shackled to the stringer.
Bring her to me.
Hervor glares as 2 men unchain her, yank her to her feet, and shove her up toward him. She shivers in the cold sea wind, her yellow hair flapping in her face.
What do you want?
She seethes.
I think it's very important,
he says grimly,
to keep your word.
He nods out at the pink horizon.
Do you know where we are?
She shrugs. Sweden? Denmark? How should I know? Wait. Her eyes light up with an intense longing. Is that?
It is,
says Sigurd.
Samsa Island.
Her eyes well up with tears.
I'm here,
She whispers.
finally.
You are.
Says Sigurd.
I told you I would bring you here.
He shifts his eyes among the crew, who begin to rise up from their rowing benches.
I also promised you your own weight in gold, and I always keep my word.
Hervor looks at him, astonished. You are truly an honorable man. I swear I won't forget this.
Indeed,
He says somberly.
it will be the last thing you remember.
She jerks her head. What? Rough hands seize her arms and shoulders. What is this? You said you were going to drop me off at Samsa Island.
That is exactly what I'm doing.
She squirms in the hands of his men, and her eyes grow wide as one of them brings a shirt of gold chain from the heap of treasure. No, Sigurd! Ugh, Van! His men force her into the heavy shirt of mail. They fasten a silver-studded belt around her waist. Several men scoop gold coins into leather bags and tie them to the belt, causing it to sag around her hips. Then a polished shield of pure gold is brought down from the pile and strapped onto her back. The girl's weighted down so heavily she can barely stand. Even so, they tie her hands behind her. She snarls as he lifts her up onto the gunwale, and she looks over her shoulder at the cold waves lapping the hull. All right, you're going to drown me? Fine. But don't forget, she says, you swore in Odin's name to tell everyone how I helped you slay the serpent.
Indeed. But what about the part where you turned on me the second I let my guard down, then stole the serpent's ring and ran away? If your bravery in helping me kill Fafnir redeems the honor you lost when you became my slave, then betraying your allies, stealing and running off just throws it all away again. The world will remember you as an outlaw, Hervor.
She glares at him, her eyes burning with hatred.
However,
He says,
because of your bravery, I'm going to give you a choice. Certain death. You'll sink to the bottom of the Kattegat, but I'll tell everyone you perished in the serpent's breath. I'll swear my men to secrecy, and Gizur isn't going to say anything, since it will mean admitting he lost a duel to a woman. Or I can show mercy, but everyone will know the whole story.
She thinks for a moment. The second option,
Very well,
he says.
open your mouth.
The crew snickers as he holds up the gleaming dagger. Hervor turns white. She stares at him, then after a moment, she takes a breath and clamps her teeth down on the blade.
I'd say we've settled our agreement,
He says. Then he lets her go. Her blue eyes flash wide as she tips over the gunwale with a muffled yelp and plunges head first into the waves. Some of the crew peer over the side, watching the glimmering gold vanish into the dark depths below. After a moment, Sigurd straightens up and slicks back his hair.
Well,
He says, as the men resume their places.
that's that.
He heads back to the prow, the last of his worries resolved, and his mind returns to the pleasant welcome he'll receive in Worms.
Chapter 15.
Hervor. The shock as I hit the water nearly stops my heart. 1,000 needles prick my flesh. It's all boiling green and gray. Salt water stinging, freezing in my nostrils, bubbles tickling my lips and nose as the glimmering surface rises swiftly away. I'm sinking fast, descending deeper, deeper into the murky darkness, swallowed into hell's vast and empty gloom. If I could only, somehow, get this dagger to my hands. But it's impossible. I'll never be able to slip my arms around my legs, not with the way they tied me up with all these heavy purses and this shirt of mail. But perhaps, weighted down like this, I'll sink faster than the dagger. I kick off my leather turn shoes and open my mouth. The decorative blade floats up away from me, and my heart skips as the Norns decide my fate. In an instant, my whole life flashes before my eyes. I cry out with a burst of bubbles. I thrust out my foot and catch the blade between my toes. I curl back my legs and bring the blade to my wiggling fingers. In my haste, I cut myself, but soon my hands are free and I'm fighting with the golden shield. I slip the strap over my head, then claw at the buckle at my waist with bone-numb fingers. The belt and heavy purses drift away with a metallic shink. The majority of the weight is cast off, and at last, I'm able to twist upright. But as I do, I scrape my foot against the rocky bottom. I struggle out of the mail shirt, red flashes snapping in my vision as it catches in my fanning hair. I'm free, and I propel myself toward the surface, my ears popping and twanging from the rapid ascent, but blood seeping from my nose, my temples throbbing with every surging beat of my heart. 70 feet. 60 feet. My lungs are going to implode. 50 feet. Gods, still 40 feet to the top. I can't hold it any longer. I need to take a breath. Hell can have me. I need to breathe. I open my mouth, but instead of filling my lungs with cold seawater, I let out a gargled cry and pull myself upwards with every last ounce of strength. 20 feet. 10. Not even the gods know how or why the Norns deal out their doom, but for some mysterious reason, they have decided amongst themselves that I should live to die another day, and in the fading twilight, I explode through the surface with a humongous gasp. I flounder in the freezing waves, shivering, sobbing, but as Sigurd's ships depart into the sunset, I start to laugh, a nervous giggle at first, then gusty, mocking laughter that rises up into the darkening sky. You haven't seen the last of me, Sigurd, Prince of Xanten. Panting, I float on my back to regain my strength, accepting the bitter cold washing over and under me. Then, after recovering for several moments, I start to swim. I'm stiff from the cold and trembling from my desperate exertions. It will take me much longer to reach the shore than it normally would, but I take my time, crawling hard through the waves for short spurts, then rolling over and doing the backstroke at an easy pace. Pretty soon, it's completely dark. It's all black around me, with silver glints of moonlight shimmering on the wavetops. I can't see the island, but I can see the stars, and even in the inky blackness, I can find my way. I keep working westward, slow and steady, floating on my back when I get too tired. In the dark, I can't tell if I've made it a mile or only a few feet, and it feels like I've been swimming forever. But sometime, perhaps several hours later, my nerves shot, my strength spent, half drowned and completely frozen, my fingers claw into cool, wet sand.
Chapter 16. Samsa Island, Denmark. Sibba Vakrison pulls his stick back from the campfire and examines the smoking strip of mutton. At his side, the orange-haired Buhund perks up, licks her lips, and barks in protest. No, girl, down. The Buhund whines sadly and rests her head between her paws. Sibba pours himself a horn of mead, and the boy across the fire watches him slurp it from the brim. Sibba, can I have some of that? No. Come on, Sibba, please. Mjadvig lets me. I am not Mjadvig, and I respect father's rules, and the rule is no mead for Dunk until he can grow a beard. Dunk sighs and inspects his own mutton stick. Where do you think those ships were headed? I don't know. I bet they were raiders. They were more likely to be merchants. Dunk rolls his eyes. What? You think a few longships full of bloodthirsty thugs is more exciting than a bunch of merchants? Yes, Dunk says quietly. Sibba shakes his head. Trading is always better than raiding. When you trade with another port, you stimulate both economies. You benefit from each other's needs and strengths and profit together, establishing a relationship based on mutual prosperity, which can develop into a residual income. If you raid that port, kill everyone and burn it to the ground, sure, you'll carry off some slaves and loot, but you can't raid them again. You've destroyed them. Not to mention that you'll lose some of your own men in the fight, if you aren't killed yourself. Who will look after their wives and children? The women will have to find new husbands. Those that can't will become a burden on society. Raiding actually weakens your economy.
Maybe, says Dunk. But in a raid, you can prove yourself and show the gods how brave you are. You can win honor and wealth. No one ever became famous just by working on a farm, but if you're fierce and strong, you can win farms and women and get renown for your name just by fighting a single duel.
And who told you about that?
Asks Sibba. Dunk shrugs. Sibba eyes his brother suspiciously.
Dunk, you know better than to talk to them.
I wasn't talking to them, says Dunk. I was just sitting there.
With Mjadveg. She isn't supposed to be talking to them either.
Dunk shivers. She says she likes to speak with them, if she meets them in the daytime. She says they're often friendly.
It doesn't matter if they're friendly,
hisses Sibba.
They're...
Just then, the Buhund pricks up her ears and barks a warning, and the two brothers stiffen as bells clatter in the dark. Spooked sheep shuffle around them to one side of the fire. Dunk and Sibba stare at each other. Slow, squishing footsteps slog toward them through the long grass. The Buhund growls, and Sibba bolts to his feet. Dunk turns white, his eyes sprung wide with fear. His knife glimmers in the firelight as he draws it from his belt.
"Put your sacks away,"
whispers Sibba.
"You'll only anger it. Get behind me. Cover your eyes."
Dunk claps his hands over his face. "Mjadveg says I have to look," he whispers.
"Look in the daytime. You can look in the night when you can grow a beard."
His brother cowering behind him in silent terror, Sibba grits his teeth as he braces for the sight, gripping his staff with white knuckles as the heavy footsteps trudge nearer. The Buhund barks madly. A vague form emerges from the darkness, a black shadow against the night sky. Hoarse gasps cause Sibba's hair to stand on end. His own breath quivers nervously.
"Go away,"
he shouts.
"You have no business with us."
An inhuman groan comes from the dark shape, and Sibba whispers an oath as its soggy footfalls quicken into a staggering run.
"I say be gone. Leave us. Leave us now in Odin's name."
But his words have no effect. A wretched creature stumbles into the firelight. A woman, sopping wet from the sea, too pale to be alive. Her skin is murky white, like the belly of a dead fish. Her lips, a bluish gray. Her yellow hair is tangled with seaweed, cut just above the shoulders. She's a drowned slave girl that must have washed up on the shore. A risen corpse, reanimated by the weird and inexplicable forces that linger over the island. But unlike the dead Sibba has encountered, whose eyeballs have long since been nibbled from their skulls by worms and beetles, leaving their faces pocked with hideous, gaping caverns, this thrall still has eyes. She looks uncertainly at the snarling Buhund, then stares at Sibba intensely, a storm of blue fire raging in her fearsome gaze. He can sense the violence about her, the panic and awful desperation as she clung to life. She's shivering horribly. Her teeth are chattering, the memory of the freezing waves so recent in her unliving mind. She starts toward him, and Sibba backs up into his brother. The newly dead are the most dangerous of all. "Out of my way," she mumbles as she staggers for the fire. The Buhund barks indignantly, and the woman glares at Sibba. "If that dog bites me, I'll kill all the three of you." Sibba quiets the Buhund, then says to her,
"I'm afraid you'll find the fire offers you no warmth. You were—"
His voice trails off as the girl peels off her wet clothing and reaches her arms out over the fire, her lithe body glistening in the ruddy light. "Loki," Dunk whispers, peeking through his fingers. For a moment, the older shepherd stares speechless at her athletic figure, until she looks at him again out of the corner of her eye. "What kind of man are you, not to offer me your cloak?"
Yes, you're gods in Asgard, yes. Here, sorry."
Sibba whirls off his cloak and drapes it over the girl's naked shoulders.
"We thought you were... after all, this is..."
"I know," she says. "Sam's Island." She draws the cloak tighter around herself and squats down near the flame, and after some time the color returns to the girl's face. She is quite beautiful, far more than any of the island women. She looks to be a year or two younger than Sibba. Her previous owner obviously didn't care to keep her. Why shouldn't he take her for himself? A warm feeling rises in his chest at the thought of making her his bed slave, but though the length of her hair identifies her as a thrall, and though he and his brother have just looked on the full view of her nakedness, there is still an unsettling air about her. The sense of violence around her has not ceased with the knowledge that she is alive. Rather than some lowly slave woman, he finds himself regarding her as his superior. It's almost as if a queen has crawled out of the sea. He offers her their food and drink, and she tears hungrily into a strip of mutton. Even the way she eats presents a sense of entitlement not found among any thrall. She must come from a noble family. But then, why does she wear the mark of thraldom? Sibba's lingering unease swells like a shadow behind him, creeping up his spine. Just who have they run into? "You're from those ships, aren't you?" asks Dunk as the girl rips off another chunk of meat with her white teeth. She looks up at him coolly, drops of water sparkling in the firelight as they drip from her golden hair.
Yes, I'm from those ships.
Who were they?
The flagship was a Frankish vessel, homeward bound from Sweden. The others were Swedes helping bear back their cargo.
I suppose they were merchants, Dunk says sadly. A shadow falls across her face.
Merchants? No, that was Prince Sigurd of Xanten.
You were his slave, then? Asks Sibba, skewering another mutton strip and lowering it to the flame. She turns her eyes on him, sharp and cruel as a pair of skinning knives.
Do you see a slave collar on my neck?
No, but...
I'm no slave, and if I wasn't in such a pleasant mood, it'd be you roasting over that fire on a stick.
Sibba cringes. If this is her in a pleasant mood, he wouldn't want to meet her on a bad day. Sorry, he says. I wasn't trying to insult you. I'm just trying to understand what you were doing in the sea. Steel flashes in her eyes, and she begins to recount the events which led to her washing up on Samsa's shore, beginning with the raid in the night, her capture, and the slaughter of her crewmates. Then how in return for her freedom, she helped Sigurd kill the serpent of Lake Storsen. Hold on, says Sibba. The serpent of Lake Storsen? You mean Fafnir?
Yes.
You're saying you killed Fafnir?
I am, yes.
She narrows her eyes as she looks between them.
His head was on those ships. It was so big it had to be hewn apart.
Sibba resists a snicker. Hewn apart? Everyone knows Fafnir's hide is impenetrable, stronger than a sheer rock face.
Sigurd has a magic sword that can cut through anything.
And then there's a matter of his acid breath.
Indeed, I lost my arm in the battle, she says. It got caught in his poison smog. The flesh was eaten right down to the bone. Sigurd was in the blast too, but he was drenched in the creature's blood and unharmed. It made him invincible. And afterwards, when I tried avenging my crewmates, I was unable to wound him, though any other man would have been lying in a puddle of himself. That's why he threw me overboard, for trying to kill him. And now he thinks I've drowned, and that hell keeps me in a watery tomb.
Her story finished, she drinks noisily from the horn in 3 big gulps. Her tale has grown more preposterous with each new syllable. Dunk stifles an awkward laugh as he eyes the woman's slender, fully fleshed arm. But Sibba doesn't find it funny, not with that aura of violence about her, and the look of murder in her eyes. She might be a liar, she might be a cracked egg, but the girl is a killer, of that he's certain. The sooner they can be rid of her, the better. Sibba eyes her warily as she stands up from the fire.
Speaking of tombs, she says, what do you shepherds know about the graves on the island?
Plenty, says Sibba. Our people dug most of them. A strange light flickers in her eyes.
Good. Then you can help me find the one I'm looking for.
I doubt it, Sibba says. There are more than 1,000 graves here, many of them from long before our time. This seems to displease the woman. Whose grave are you looking for? Asks Dunk. The woman proudly tilts her chin.
The barrow of Angantyr Arngrimsson. I am Hervor, his daughter.
Now it all makes sense. The aura of violence, the eerie feeling niggling at the back of his mind. The girl is a berserker. It's clear to him, now that he knows who her father was. And she's come looking for his tomb. Then she means to unearth the curse, the dark power of which his own father sometimes whispered, though very rarely and with much haste. If only this woman had drowned in the Kattegat.
I'm sorry, says Sibba. I don't think we can be much help. Like I said, there are more than 1,000 graves.
The woman's hair bristles from her shoulders, and she draws a long breath in through her nostrils.
Don't pretend, she says, her voice laced with silky poison. You know where his barrow is, and you know what's in there. I can see it in your eyes.
Sibba glances at Dunk. He's grown very quiet, staring down at his knees. Beside him, the Buhund whines submissively.
Yes, she says, I've come for Tyrfing, the precious heirloom of my forefathers. I know you mean to keep me from it. No doubt you've heard of the dark powers which possess it. No doubt you've heard of the curse that has haunted my family for generation upon generation. But I tell you, I will find my father's grave, and I will claim Tyrfing as my own. Now, if you help me find it, I will be gracious. I'll always remember how you treated me with kindness, and I swear I'll leave the island in peace. If you don't help me, well, I'll probably get frustrated looking for the tomb. I'll be thinking about the two of you, growing angrier and angrier. I've heard a lot about Tyrfing's power, she says. I'll be pretty eager to test it out, if you understand me.
Sibba swallows as she looks from him to his brother, and then back to him.
So, where is my father buried?
On the south of the island,
says Sibba,
in the forest, near the coast.
You'll lead me to it, then?
Yes, but we must wait until morning.
I don't want to wait.
But, please, this is Samsa Island. There are places not even the bravest men would dare venture to at night, that forest being chief among them.
She sucks her teeth.
Do I look like a man to you?
No, but...
I want to go now.
All right, he says, his voice shaking a little. I'll take you to the edge of the forest, but no further. I don't care what you say.
Dunk gasps. Sibba, you can't.
Dunk, you stay here with the sheep.
Sibba looks up at the woman, his stomach squirming.
Swear to me you'll leave in peace.
The woman grins and raises her hand over one eye. Chapter 17. Hervor.
I've come to the edge of hell. A black wall looms over me in the dark, trees all gnarled and twisted, terrifying in the torchlight. A path is cleft through the forest like a wound, and 2 runestones mark the entrance, each smeared with long, dark stains.
This is it,
the shepherd says.
This is as far as I'll go. If you ask me, I don't think you should go in there either. But do as you must.
I shudder as I peer down that dark, foreboding path. I'd like to tell him I've changed my mind and wait till morning, but part of me knows I can't carry out my business by the light of day. I take his sacks and tell him to wait there for me, and he watches with fear and intrigue as I slice my palm and approach the entrance, smearing the smooth face of each runestone with my life's blood. I stand before the black opening and stare into the darkness. Then, with a shivering breath, I stride onward. Dead leaves crunch under my feet. The cold sea wind whispers in the tangled branches, but over the hush of waves and the ocean breeze, I hear the sigh of voices. The hair bristles on the back of my neck. The shepherd told me on the way that Samsa Island is a between place, where this world meets the next, but this forest belongs to the dead, and hell rules it. I tighten my grip on the torch, and as I glance back at him, out in the misty pasture, it's like looking out from inside a tomb. I'd always thought it was a shepherd who set me on this path, that thrall, Folke. But for some reason, I realize now that I started on this path even before then, when I stood on the bank with my brother Hadric and threw my spinning tools in the stream. That was the moment in which my destiny was sealed. Had I obeyed my mother and washed and spun those sacks of wool, I might have stayed in Offitfjord and married a chieftain's son. I would have been Hervor Frodmer's daughter, the woman everyone wanted me to be. But when I threw away my spindle and distaff, little did I know I was throwing aside the domestic life and following the path of my father. Now, Tyrfing is my destiny, and no enemy from this world or the next will stand in my way. Hell herself won't stop me. I stalk deeper into the woods. The black voices continue whispering from the branches, and the shadows shift and swell in the torchlight. After some time, I hear the trickle of water, and I soon come to a gushing brook. But instead of the cool, clear water of a forest stream, the current is a murky scarlet color and smells the way a temple does after it's been reddened with the yearly sacrifice. There's an intense familiarity about this place that makes my skin crawl. The Sørgstrøm. I've no choice but to cross to the other side. It's waist deep, but instead of the bitter cold shocking my bones, the current is warm and thick, and unlike when I waded through the Sørgstrøm, shivering, stumbling, nearly falling, I stride confidently across onto the opposite bank, my torch held high. There's a dim glow now from the path ahead, a procession of torches flickering in the dark, and from this point on, the path is lined with smooth white stones. I follow this sacred trail into the heart of the woods. Then I come to the end, passing under a great log archway mounted with the grinning skull of an enormous bear, and 12 torches curve out away from me in a broad semicircle around a gigantic black mound. My father's tomb rises out of the earth like a giant igloo, nearly reaching the height of the trees. 3 rings of round stones encircle it, and a stone corridor juts out toward me from the dark heap. The entrance to the tomb, sealed shut by a great slab of rock. My heart overflows with emotion, and tears spring into my eyes as I look upon the proud resting place. Inside lie the bones of my father and uncles, and with them Tyrfing. I have arrived at last. I stare at the huge stone slab shutting off the way into the grave. I have a better chance of pulling down a house with my bare hands than I do of pushing that slab aside. Loki, how did they even bring it here, and where did it come from? But as I continue to study the massive obstacle, I see that the slab is a bit taller than the corridor. I start towards the tomb, my veins ablaze with the fires of determination. With a running leap, I pull myself up onto the top of the corridor. I sit down and press my heels against the slab, and gripping the edge on either side, I push out with all my strength. I hiss and growl, and I can feel the veins popping on my forehead. There's a rumble. It's moving. Just a little more. Then there's a scraping creak, and the slab tilts out away from the tomb and crashes to the ground. My heart flutters. There's lightning in the air. Grinning like a giddy maiden, I skip down onto the fallen slab and peer into the black entrance. I hold my breath, delighting in every step that brings me closer. There are stone steps going down into the dusty gloom. My father is down there, my true father, and I realize for the first time how nervous I am to look upon his face, even the face of a corpse who's lain dead for years. Trembling, I place my hand on the entrance and prepare to step across the threshold and go down into the grave, when suddenly a blast of heat drives me back. A wall of flame roars up from the mouth of the tomb. Shadows swoon and shudder, and the very trees seem to cower in fear as a fiery explosion engulfs the entire mound in a roaring inferno.
Chapter 18.
Hervor. So fierce is the heat of this whirlwind of fire that I cannot approach my father's tomb. But hotter than the swirling flames is the anger burning in my heart. Here, now that I have finally arrived at the grave of my father, after everything I've overcome, even the dead seek to prevent me from claiming what is mine. Tears sting my eyes, and I lower my arms, letting the full force of the fire toast my face. I will not be dissuaded. Come gods or men, I will not be dissuaded. I snatch up one of the smooth stones and whip it hard into the mouth of the tomb, causing the fire to hiss and blare, and I scream with all the fury that's resided in my heart since the hour of my birth. Angantyr! Angantyr! Your daughter Hervor calls you! A bright flash of light snaps in the sky, followed by a deafening crack. I squint, crouching low as a gust of wind blasts through the woods. I turn my head, my hair flapping violently. Angantyr! I cry again, my voice drowned out in the howling gale. The wind blows even stronger. Trees creak and sway. Dead leaves rustle up from the ground. The grave fires billow and whirl with even greater ferocity. I tilt forward, shielding my face against the blasting dirt and leaves. My lips move silently as I scream my father's name over the gale a final time. Suddenly the wind stops, and a deathly voice hisses from the tomb.
Hervor, why have you come? The living have no business with the dead.
A sharp chill shoots through my bones. My father has awakened from the sleep of death. I have come for Tyrfing. I've come to claim my inheritance. I'm met with a long silence. I stare anxiously into the burning tomb, waiting for the fires to be quelled so I can go inside. But then my father replies,
It is not here. AUDIOBOOK pried Tyrfing from my grasp and threw it into the sea. You will never find it. You have come in vain.
You liar! I know you have Tyrfing in there. Now put out these fires so I can come inside and see you.
I am unable to do such a thing,
he says,
just as my brothers and I are unable to step outside this grave mound, though the others may freely walk the island. We are confined to our tomb, save to wander deeper into the cold wastes of the underworld. For our wickedness, hell has tethered us on a short leash.
Then come to the mouth of the tomb and pass it out to me. The bright flames rustle in the sea wind, and when my father replies, there is a deep sadness in his voice.
Hervor, child, I would endure 1,000 years of torment before I let you carry off this evil thing. Do not ask me for it. Go home, go back to Lofoten, and live in peace.
Lofoten? What life do you think awaits me there? I'm an outlaw.
It is not too late to make amends. You know well your grandfather would forgive you if you went back and showed remorse.
I doubt it, and I don't regret the path I've chosen. Everyone says you were a savage brute, the most feared man in Scandinavia. Well, I'm glad you're dead. I know I would have hated you. The rough way you handled my mother, but as much as I despised you from the moment I first heard your name, I could not help admiring you. Your blood is my blood, and despite all the efforts to prevent it, I've grown to be just like you. Now fetch up Tyrfing so I can carry on your legacy and get fame and riches for our line.
Foolish girl, you may not regret your path so far, but I tell you the truth. You will regret this moment. With Tyrfing, you will indeed gain fame and riches, but in greater measure you will gain infamy and grief. Hated by all, yours will be a cup of tears. Your ill-gotten wealth will glitter with a dull and empty sheen, and your golden crown will be a cold and heavy burden on your brows as you sit in your dark and lonely hall. This sword will destroy you, Hervor. Again, I urge you, do not ask for it.
Dritzek, there is nothing you can say to dissuade me from my destiny. I will have Tyrfing. I will starve to death outside your grave before I leave without it. May there be no peace for you in death if you do not pass it up to me.
Peace? It will be a restless slumber, girl, knowing you've gone off with this wicked thing. But save your curses. I am bound by Tyrfing's magic to pass it on to you, just as you are bound to pass it on to your sons. And on that day, noble daughter, this sword will pierce your heart with grief.
The Norns have already spoken our doom. I will wield Tyrfing unafraid.
You do not know what you are saying. Prepare yourself. Your father comes.
The fires hiss and shudder, and after a while, a shadow appears within the burning tomb, materializing into the form of a man. Another figure appears beside this grisly apparition, then another, until 12 gruesome corpses crowd the mouth of the grave. Their faces are blue and oozing, riddled with white worms. Here and there, patches of flesh have rotted through to blackened bone. The stink of death creeps into my palate with tangible thickness. Gagging, I recoil with an oath, my hand clapped fast over my mouth and nostrils, ice water rushing through my veins as I stare into the dark, gaping pits that once held my father's eyes. Then I fix my gaze on the regal sword hanging at his hip, and my heart throbs with intense yearning. Quickly, father, give me Tyrfing. Much too slowly, he unshoulders the strap and slides Tyrfing from his belt. Their dead faces long with melancholy. My uncles hold me in grim regard as he holds it out to me from the inferno, but the hilt is still deep within the whirling flames, unreachable by mortal flesh.
Here, daughter. Tyrfing is yours to claim.
I can't reach it. Come out of the fire more. My father takes a small step forward, then stops abruptly, as if he's struck against an invisible wall.
Hell bids me go no further. Come, Hervor. Take it, if you dare.
He grins widely with black, crumbling teeth, and his mocking laughter echoes from the mouth of the tomb. Tyrfing is right there, right in front of me. Were I to thrust my arm into the fire, it would be mine, but my flesh would be consumed within the flames. I would draw back a smoldering limb of blackened meat. Squinting against the hot glare, I tear my sleeve off at the shoulder and inch nearer to the fiery tempest. My father ceases his laughter. Already the heat is scalding me, and I can't go any closer lest I ignite my clothes and hair. Then, with great reluctance, I reach my left hand into the fire. At once, blazing tongues lick my flesh, wrapping furiously around my wrist and hand. But no smoke rises from my arm, no scorching agony screams into my brain, nor does my flesh melt and sizzle in the searing heat. Like Sigurd, my one arm has been made invincible in the serpent's blood. With a triumphant shout, I thrust my hand deeper into the fire and seize Tyrfing by the hilt, bridging the realms of life and death for a single fleeting moment. My father lets it go, and I jerk away from the flames so sharply that I stagger and fall down. Tyrfing is mine. I rise and hold it up in wonder. What incredible craftsmanship! A fine work of red leather and silver. The pommel is shaped like a closed fist. At the hilt, the wolf Fenrir stretches his hungry jaws around the sun. A fat ruby bulges from the scabbard locket like an infected eye, dazzling in the firelight, seeing all. The grip fits perfectly in my grasp, and the weight? No other sword on earth could be balanced so suitably for my arm, It's as if this sword was forged for me alone. An urge comes over me to draw Tyrfing from its sheath, to swing the naked blade, to hear its song as it cuts the air. Holding it over my head, I very slowly start to slide it from the scabbard. The ruby flashes, and a red and eerie glow spills from the dwarf-cursed steel. The oiled blade slips free smoothly, like liquid. Gods, the sheer power of this blade! I can feel its will throbbing in my heart. It wants to be used. It wants to be soaked in warm blood once again. It's craving violence after its long slumber in the tomb.
No, no, Hervor.
My father's shouting breaks my trance, and with a startled gasp, I thrust the half-drawn blade back into the sheath.
Tyrfing cannot be unsheathed without spilling blood, he cries. You must never draw it from the scabbard when you are alone.
Yes, that's right, I say with some embarrassment, shuddering at how quickly I'd forgotten Tyrfing's curse. And whoever it cuts will be dead by nightfall, no matter how small the wound.
Yes,
my father says.
Between Hjalmar and myself, he was by far the better swordsman. For all the deep tracks his blade hewed into my flesh, I only once nicked him through the mail and scratched his collarbone. But it was that little scratch that killed him.
I'll be careful, I tell him, as I shoulder the strap and buckle the belt around my waist. You've done right by me, Father. Thank you. My father and uncle stand in silence, their rotting hair and garments billowing in the roaring flames, each of them staring sadly with an eyeless gaze. I'm glad to have spoken to you, I say. It's been good to see you.
We cannot say the same to you, Hervor.
Those words prick me, and I look away into the dark woods. Well, I wish you well, Father. May you rest in peace.
There shall be no rest for us, knowing what evil thing now keeps you. Farewell, Hervor, and beware.
My father and uncles float backwards into the grave, and I throw my arm across my face as the wind howls through the trees again. The tomb itself seems to be drawing in a massive breath, snuffing out the fires with a sucking hiss. I'm alone now in the dark, but as I rest my hand on Tyrfing's hilt, a red glare pulses from the ruby on the scabbard, like the steady beating of a heart. It's an eerie thing for a sword to have a heartbeat, but then I see how closely my fate is bound to this enchanted thing, for after a moment I come to a chilling realization. Tyrfing's heartbeat is my own.
This has been A Scoundrel's Courage, written by Timothy J.R. Raines, narrated by Sarah Palmero.